My name is Ava, and I am 34 years old. I live with my husband James, and we both work for the company founded by my father-in-law. Although he is now retired, my father-in-law single-handedly transformed a small construction firm into an enterprise generating $250 billion in annual revenue. He even acquired rival companies, and while his methods could be forceful, everyone admired his remarkable business acumen. James, chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised in a pampered environment and possesses a gentle nature. However, I fear his gentleness isn't suited for the cutthroat world of business. While gentle may sound pleasant, in reality, he is incredibly indecisive. I've started to doubt his suitability as a husband, let alone a CEO. James himself has admitted, "I'm not cut out to be a CEO. I'll probably just be a figurehead if I become one. It's easier for me that way." His lack of serious intention to take over the company has left me frustrated after 5 years of marriage. In stark contrast to James, I consider myself quite decisive. During his active years, my father-in-law appreciated this quality in me and entrusted me with various tasks. Before marrying James, I worked at a bank where I managed finances and always kept numbers in mind. I planned to become a full-time homemaker after our wedding, but my father-in-law requested that I join the construction company instead. Soon after I started working there, he began inviting me to board meetings and seeking my opinions on management matters. Initially, the board members were skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in such important discussions. However, as I consistently offered valuable insights, they began to listen to my suggestions. Despite James being a board member, he rarely attended meetings, and this was accepted as the norm by the board and my father-in-law. One day, after returning home from a meeting, I found James nonchalantly watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting?" I asked. I asked angrily. "You're a key member, you should take it seriously." Without showing any remorse, he retorted, "Even if I attend, I don't really understand the discussions. Besides, the board members prefer you, so there's no problem, right?" I wondered if he was irritated by my participation in the board meetings. Despite his remarks, my father-in-law had been teaching me the intricacies of running the business and seemed to be grooming me as his successor. I had started enjoying my involvement in management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to meet my father-in-law's expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. Whenever there were major decisions to be made, the board members would consult me while James was sidelined. I had hoped that being in such a situation would spur James to work harder, but instead, he became even more disengaged from his work. Although he would come to the office in the morning, he would disappear somewhere by noon and stay home for the rest of the day. When he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work at all, seemingly indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company was increasing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law's retirement, the board members relied on me more and more, and I was tasked with duties akin to those of a CEO. Given that we were a large company with many employees, I was committed to increasing sales and profits for the sake of our workers. With the hard work of our employees, our sales began to grow. I found running the company more interesting and became more engrossed in my work. Conversely, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his appearances at the company began to diminish. The conversations between us at home lessened, and our relationship became increasingly tense. Around that time, our lives took a different turn. James came home and casually mentioned, "I ran into your sister Megan today and we had lunch together." Megan, 2 years older than me, had just divorced about 6 months ago due to her infidelity. This led to a big commotion when her enraged husband stormed our parents' home. My husband James went to my parents' house to calm down Megan's husband in my place as I was busy with work. With his gentle upbringing and calming personality, James managed to convince Megan's furious husband to leave for the time being. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." She praised James. Megan's husband, in his anger, must have been disarmed by James' calm and easygoing demeanor. Megan was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony, but since this incident, she seemed to look at James differently. Until then, she had thought of James, who was not particularly attractive and quite indecisive, as just a rich, pampered son. After the incident, she seemed to believe he was a respectable business owner. Now single after her divorce, Megan probably saw James as a great catch, given her love for wealthy men. However, I, engrossed in work, couldn't imagine such a thing. Of course, my sister wouldn't have known that James is just a nominal executive who doesn't actually manage the company. Megan's ex-husband was an elite employee of a foreign company. At their wedding, she had bragged to me, "My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome. You're jealous, aren't you?" Her ex-husband was handsome, smart, and carried a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after hearing from James that he had lunch with Megan, I returned home to find James unusually serious. "I have something to discuss," he said. It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad premonition. With my heart pounding, I waited for him to speak. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more surprised to hear that Megan was pregnant. At a loss for words, I listened as James continued. "Megan is planning to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you." Stunned, I asked, "So you want to marry my sister?" With a troubled look, James responded, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at James' typical indecisiveness and replied, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can't be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed like my husband and I couldn't make any decisions together, so I decided to meet directly with my sister to figure things out. Even though I had already made up my mind to divorce, I thought I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business, but if I divorced, I would become a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-law's house and told my father-in-law exactly what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled at the news of her son having a child but quickly quieted down when glared at by my father-in-law. She seemed more concerned about her grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Ava, I want you to continue to be involved in the company's management as you have been. I don't care about James. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do what he likes." It seemed that my father-in-law valued the management of the company more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired, he still had a strong voice in the company, and since he held most of the company's shares, no executives would go against his will. I was also interested in my work and reluctant to give it up now. With my job settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile. "Ava, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you plenty of consolation money. Please leave this house immediately," she said with a triumphant air. My husband sat silently, listening to our conversation without saying anything despite being the one who caused the problem. I was appalled at his indifferent face. "It's okay to get divorced," I said, "but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property. Let's bring in a lawyer and decide properly." "I never thought you, my sister, would fall for a man like James," I retorted to my sister with irony. She glared at me with a stern face for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. I finally realized that it's not about looks in men, it's about what's inside. It was funny to hear my sister talk as if she fully understood my husband's inner self. Holding back my laughter, I replied, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with James." The inner self my sister was talking about was likely money. She seemed to be under the impression that my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him. When the discussion was over, my sister said she would start living here and brought a moving company. Though I only took out the necessary items, knowing my quick-tempered sister, I had already arranged for a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and had documents prepared for the division of property and claims for alimony. The next day, after moving out my belongings, I started negotiations for alimony and division of property with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer. My husband was still present that day, sitting with an indifferent face, and only my sister was speaking. "As I said before, I'm willing to pay as much alimony as you want, so please decide at your convenience." Hearing my sister's words, my lawyer decided to also claim alimony against my sister in addition to my husband. My sister was still paying alimony in installments to her ex-husband, so my lawyer had said in advance that it might be impossible to claim alimony from her. But since she said she would pay me as much as I wanted, I decided to make a claim. When it came to negotiations about the division of property, my sister excitedly said, This mansion is originally James's family's, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property, right? The lawyer answered my sister emotionlessly. This building and the land belong to the company, so it's up to the company to decide. Even my husband seemed surprised by this. Is that so? I thought this house was Dad's, he said casually. My sister, on the other hand, was taken aback and attacked the lawyer. Wait a minute, so does that mean I can't live in this house? The lawyer responded in a businesslike manner. Since it's company property, you can continue to live here if the company allows it. At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Oh, you should have said that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here. The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James. Seeing my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband yet didn't even know that fact, made me laugh. My sister immediately turned to my husband and yelled, "Ha, James, you're not the president." I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister, James is merely an advisor without any executive rights. I'm an executive director, but I was also made president. Our father-in-law, the founder, had always been the president, but when he retired, he made me an executive director and president. The other executives appreciated my performance, so there was no opposition. On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without executive rights, which is more of a pity than a mere employee. Even though it's called an executive salary, since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would get. So, I was bearing all the living expenses. James, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even bother to know whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our home was company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. I thought of it as a normal rental property. The lawyer, still laughing, asked me, can we continue to rent this house to James? My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from James? Isn't it the company's property? Just make it free. The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was James, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time. Guess a house this big does have a high rent, he muttered. I can't afford that with my salary, James admitted, realizing his executive compensation would barely leave any money after paying the rent. Covering their living expenses would be hard. Over the 5 years of our marriage, James had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared in high rent and living expenses, leaving hardly any assets. Splitting the savings was the only option for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, now aware that the mansion she had hoped for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. James was grinning as usual. I suggested, why don't we vacate this place and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news. James agreed, but I laughed at the thought of why I had to consider this man, who was about to be my ex, this much. I started worrying whether this unreliable man could raise a child, but I decided to leave it as it was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seem pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right? She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. Alimony, I have to pay it too. She was astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the earlier discussion. You said, I'll give plenty of alimony, but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right? My salary is really low. James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents. Seeing James and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home, just as I had warned. But there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for an heir, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for James, and I was paid in full. But my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him, Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well? To this, the father-in-law responded, I have no reason to be called Dad by you. He was fuming. Not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for, my sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried the ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him. "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." I wouldn't get back with my ex-husband even if he begged me. I had stopped believing in him when he cheated on me with my sister and was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. He was dismissed from his executive position and is now working as a temporary employee. I've continued being the CEO, which is the core of my life. I don't even think about remarrying someone after the breakup. I've kept in touch with my father-in-law, receiving advice when needed. For now, I want to focus on the company, thinking of it as being married to it for the sake of my employees.
When I was 10, my cruel parents abandoned me, claiming I had a mental disorder. After 15 years, I inherited $10 million from my uncle. Suddenly, they found me and demanded money for my sister's treatment. I gave them a single box, and when they opened it, they were stunned. I was 10 years old when my life changed forever. At that age, I didn't fully understand why things were the way they were. I only knew that I wasn't like my twin sister, Sophia. She was everything my parents wanted: smart, confident, and always achieving something great. She got perfect scores in school, won competitions, and teachers adored her. My mother would always say, "You're amazing, Sophia. You're going to do great things in life." My father would laugh and agree, saying, "She'll never have to struggle like the rest of us." I was different. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus in class. The sound of chairs scraping the floor, pencils clicking, and students whispering distracted me. My teachers got frustrated with me, and instead of helping, they ignored me. My parents did the same. If Sophia wanted a new book, she got it. If she wanted to go on a school trip, they made it happen. But me? I was left behind. My needs were always seen as unimportant. There was only one place where I felt safe: Uncle James and Aunt Sarah's house in Texas. Twice a year, during school breaks, I was allowed to visit them. Uncle James owned a small woodcraft factory, and he would let me sit in his workshop, watching him carve beautiful furniture and decorations out of wood. "This is an art, Evelyn," he would tell me. "It's about patience, attention, and passion." Aunt Sarah was just as kind, always making sure I had a warm meal and a comforting smile. Unlike my parents, they never made me feel like I was a burden. One day, just as spring break was about to begin, my parents sat me and Sophia down. "We have some big news," my father said, smiling. "We've sold our apartment." I didn't understand. "Where are we going to live?" I asked, feeling uneasy. My mother sighed as if my question was stupid. "Stop asking useless things. We've been planning this for a long time. Pack your things." I had no choice but to obey. I packed my school bag with a few things I had: some clothes, a couple of toys, and my sketchbook where I had drawn the beautiful wood carvings I saw in Uncle James's workshop. "I'm ready," I whispered. But something felt wrong. The house was already packed up. How had I not noticed before? The furniture was gone, the walls were empty, and only Sophia's things were neatly placed in separate boxes. We got into the car, but something was different. Sophia wasn't with us. "Where's Sophia?" I asked. My mother shot me a sharp look. "She's fine. She's already where she needs to be." I didn't understand, but I stayed quiet. I was used to not getting answers. The car ride felt endless. The farther we drove, the more anxious I became. I had hoped we were going somewhere special, that maybe this time my parents were taking me somewhere just for me. I imagined a new house, a place where they might finally notice me. But when the car stopped, my stomach dropped. We were in front of Uncle James and Aunt Sarah's house. I smiled, thinking it was a short visit before we went to our new home. "Yay! Uncle James and Aunt Sarah," I said excitedly, running to the door. But when I tried to open it, it was locked. Confused, I turned to my parents. "They're not home." My mother's voice was emotionless. "They're at work. But don't worry, they'll be back soon." She grabbed my small bag and tossed it onto the doorstep. I frowned. "Wait, Where are you going? I took a step toward the car, but my father's voice stopped me. Stay here, Evelyn. I felt my chest tighten. Are you leaving me here? My mother sighed impatiently. Sophia got into a prestigious private school. It guarantees her success. We sold the apartment to pay for her tuition and to move closer to her school. Having you around, it would just distract her.
Her words hit me like a slap.
My voice shook. But what about me? My father leaned out of the car window, smiling as if this was just another normal day. A new life begins for the three of us, he said cheerfully. Goodbye, Evelyn. And just like that, they sped away. I stood there, frozen, watching the car disappear down the road. My heart pounded, my hands trembled.
Mom.
Dad. I screamed, running after the car. Please don't leave me. But they were gone. The sun was setting, and I was alone. Completely alone. I don't know how long I stood there. My legs felt weak, and my mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had they really abandoned me? Then I heard footsteps. A familiar voice called my name. Evelyn? What are you doing out here? I turned to see Uncle James and Aunt Sarah standing in front of me. The concern on their faces made my emotions spill over. I burst into tears, unable to speak, unable to explain. Uncle James quickly took off his jacket and wrapped it around me. You're freezing, he said softly. He exchanged a look with Aunt Sarah, who bent down to wipe my tears. Come inside, sweetheart, she whispered. You're safe now. They led me inside, and as soon as I stepped into the warm, familiar house, I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. My uncle and aunt didn't ask questions right away. They let me cry, let me feel the weight of what had just happened. After a while, Uncle James stood up and said, I need to call your parents. I listened as the conversation turned into an argument. Uncle James's voice was angry, something I had never heard before. How could you do this? He demanded. You abandoned your child like she was nothing. I couldn't hear what my father said on the other end, but whatever it was, it only made my uncle's fury grow. Then don't bother coming back. She's staying with us. With that, he slammed the phone down. He turned to me, his expression softer now. Evelyn, he said gently, you're home now. Aunt Sarah pulled me into a hug. You don't have to worry about anything anymore, she whispered. You're safe with us. For the first time that night, I let out a deep breath. My parents were gone, and I was abandoned. But in that moment, I wasn't alone. I still didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. My life had just started over. For the first few weeks after my parents abandoned me, I barely spoke. My mind kept replaying that moment. The car driving away, my mother's cold words, my father's cheerful farewell, as if he was just dropping me off at school instead of leaving me behind forever. I felt like a discarded piece of trash, something unwanted and unnecessary. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had done something wrong. Maybe if I had tried harder in school. Maybe if I had been more like Sophia. Maybe then they would have kept me. But no matter how much I wished it, the truth didn't change. They were gone, and they weren't coming back. Uncle James and Aunt Sarah never once made me feel like an outsider. They never treated me like a burden. Aunt Sarah made sure I had warm meals, clean clothes, and a room of my own. She would sit beside me at night, brushing my hair gently, whispering, You're safe here, sweetheart. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Uncle James was patient with me. He never pushed me to talk about what had happened. Instead, he kept me close, introducing me to the world of woodcraft. Every day after school, I followed him to his small factory, watching as he skillfully carved pieces of wood into beautiful furniture, sculptures, and decorations. You don't have to be good at school to be good at something, he told me one day. You just have to find what you love and work hard at it. At first, I just watched, fascinated by the way his hands moved effortlessly, shaping rough wood into something beautiful. But one day, he handed me a small block of wood and a carving knife. Try it, he said with a warm smile. See how it feels. I was hesitant at first. I had never been good at anything before. But as I dragged the knife across the wood, something changed. My hands felt steady, My mind focused in a way it never had in school. I lost myself in the motion, carving simple patterns, feeling the texture of the wood under my fingers. For the first time in my life, I felt capable. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Slowly, I began to heal. The sadness was still there, but it wasn't as crushing anymore. My uncle and aunt had given me a new home, a new life, and a new passion. Woodcraft became my escape, my therapy. I would sit for hours carving small figures, intricate patterns, anything that came to my mind. Uncle James taught me everything he knew: how to smooth rough edges, how to shape the wood into something elegant, how to bring my ideas to life. But even with all the love and support I received, some wounds didn't heal so easily.
School was still hard.
My teachers weren't cruel, but they didn't understand me the way Uncle James and Aunt Sarah did. I still struggled to concentrate, still found it difficult to communicate my thoughts properly. My classmates didn't bully me, but they didn't try to befriend me either. I was just there. Invisible. Except for one person. Her name was Lena, and she was different from the other kids. She didn't care that I wasn't the smartest or the most social. She just sat with me during lunch, talked to me about silly things, and invited me over to her house without making me feel like she was doing me a favor. She made me feel normal. "You don't talk much, but that's okay," she once said with a grin. "I talk enough for both of us." For the first time, I had a friend. Years passed, and little by little, I found my place in the world. By the time I turned 18, I was no longer the scared, broken child my parents had abandoned. I had grown into someone new, someone stronger. Uncle James let me take on bigger projects at the factory, trusting me with more responsibilities. By then, I could carve furniture, decorative pieces, and even custom orders for clients. I had turned my passion into a skill, and for the first time, I felt valuable. Then one day, something unexpected happened. I was working late in the workshop when Aunt Sarah walked in, holding her phone with a strange look on her face. "Evelyn," she said carefully, "your parents called." My hands froze. A sharp, cold feeling ran through my chest. "What?" I whispered. She hesitated before continuing. They want to talk to you." I hadn't heard their voices in 15 years. I hadn't even thought about them in a long time. But now, just hearing that they had called sent my heart racing. I shook my head. "I don't want to talk to them." Aunt Sarah nodded, respecting my decision. "I told them that." "But they're coming here." I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. "They what?" "They're coming to Texas," she said, her voice tight. "Tomorrow." I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was 10 years old again, standing on that doorstep, watching them leave me behind.
Why? Why now?
I had built a life without them. I had learned to be happy without them. And now they were coming back. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to feel. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow, everything would change. I barely slept that night. My mind was a storm of memories I had tried so hard to bury. My parents had left me without hesitation, without looking back. They had treated me like I was nothing, like I was disposable. And now, after 15 years of silence, they were coming back?
Why?
What did they want from me? The next morning, I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of Aunt Sarah moving around in the kitchen. I kept hoping it was all a mistake, that they had changed their minds and wouldn't show up. But by the afternoon, my worst fear came true. I heard a car pull up outside. My stomach twisted painfully. Aunt Sarah knocked gently on my door. "Evelyn, they're here." I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see them. But a part of me needed to. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted answers. I wanted to know why now. I walked out slowly, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw them. My parents. They looked different. My father, once sharp and confident, now had a slouched posture, a tired, defeated look in his eyes. My mother, who used to pride herself on looking perfect, had deep wrinkles, her expensive clothes replaced with worn-out jeans and a faded sweater. But the most shocking thing was that they smiled when they saw me. "Evelyn," my father said cheerfully, stepping forward like we were long-lost family reuniting after years apart. You've grown so much. I took a step back. My hands curled into fists. I didn't trust that smile. My mother's eyes scanned the house, her gaze lingering on the woodcraft workshop. It's nice here, she said, nodding. Much better than I expected. Aunt Sarah stepped beside me, arms crossed. What do you want? Her voice was sharp, protective. My father sighed dramatically, as if he were exhausted from carrying some great burden. Evelyn, we need your help. There it was. The real reason they had come. Help. My voice was cold. You left me when I was 10. I haven't heard from you in 15 years. Now you need my help. My mother pursed her lips, as if she were annoyed by my attitude. We made mistakes, she said in a forced, apologetic tone. But we're still your parents. I felt something snap inside me. No, you're not. You gave up that title the day you drove away and never looked back. My father sighed, rubbing his temples as if I was the one being difficult. Look, Evelyn, we're in trouble. We lost everything. Our house, our jobs. And Sophia, well, she isn't doing so well either. My breath caught in my throat. Sophia. I hadn't thought about her in years. I remembered how perfect she was in my parents' eyes, how she had everything handed to her. What happened to her? As if reading my mind, my mother shook her head. She was doing great for a while. Got into the best college, had a high-paying job, but then she just failed. Failed? I frowned. She couldn't handle the pressure, my father muttered. She quit her job, shut herself in her apartment. Wouldn't even open the door for us. We had to leave her behind when things got bad for us. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. So, you abandoned her too? Neither of them answered. That was all I needed to know. And now you're here, I said, my voice steady. Because you need money. My mother gave me a fake smile. You've done well for yourself, haven't you? She glanced toward Uncle James's workshop. We heard you're running a successful business. Your father and I were thinking we could help. You know, become part of the family business. I felt sick. They weren't here because they cared. They weren't here because they regretted what they did. They were here because they wanted something from me. I shook my head.
No.
My father frowned. No. No, I took a step forward, my heart pounding. You left me when I was a child. You treated me like garbage. And now that you've lost everything, you want to use me?
No.
I don't owe you anything. My mother's smile disappeared. You're being ungrateful. That made my blood boil. Ungrateful. I took another step toward her. You left me to fend for myself at 10 years old. You treated me like I wasn't even a person. And now you expect me to just hand over my life to you. My father's face darkened. Evelyn, we're your family. Blood is blood. I clenched my jaw.
No.
Family is the people who love and support you. And that's not you. There was silence. Then Aunt Sarah did something that nearly made me laugh. She walked back into the house and returned with a bag of salt. My mother's eyes widened. What are you doing? Aunt Sarah smirked. Bad luck, she said simply, before throwing a handful of salt right at them. My parents flinched. What the? Uncle James joined in, tossing salt right at my father's face. You abandoned Evelyn once. You don't get to waltz back into her life like nothing happened. I grabbed the bag and, with one final, satisfying move, I dumped the rest of the salt onto them. My mother gasped in outrage. My father looked furious. Get out, I said. And don't ever come back. They tried to argue, but Uncle James stepped forward, his expression dark. If you don't leave right now, I'll make sure the sheriff knows you're trespassing. That did it. My parents, covered in salt, glared at me one last time before storming off. As they got into their car, my mother rolled down the window and spat. You'll regret this, Evelyn. But I didn't. I watched as their car disappeared down the road, just like it had 15 years ago. But this time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't broken. I turned to Aunt Sarah and Uncle James, my real family. They smiled at me proud. I had won. But something told me this wasn't over yet. A few weeks passed after my parents left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I wanted to believe they had given up, that they had finally accepted I was not going to be their lifeline. But deep down, I knew better. People like them didn't just walk away without trying to take what they thought they deserved. Then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a knock echoed through the house. At first, I thought it was a customer for the workshop, but the way the knocking grew louder, more impatient, sent a chill down my spine. Uncle James answered the door, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, I heard his voice, sharp and commanding. "What do you want?" I walked toward the entrance, my heart racing. And there she was, Sophia. She stood on the porch, looking nothing like the confident, perfect sister I remembered. Her once polished appearance was gone. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes looked hollow, as if she hadn't slept in days. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, there was no smugness, no superiority. Just shame. "Evelyn," she whispered. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't say anything.
I didn't know what to say.
This was the sister who had spent years looking down on me, who had refused to acknowledge my existence in school, who had everything handed to her while I was tossed aside like trash.
And now?
She was here, abandoned just like I had been. Aunt Sarah stepped beside me, arms crossed. "Where are your parents?" Sophia let out a bitter laugh. "Gone." Her voice cracked. "They took whatever money they had left and ran. I woke up one morning and they were just gone. No note, no explanation. I lost my apartment. I have no job. I have nothing." She swallowed hard, looking at me. "I know I don't deserve it, but can I stay here?" My first instinct was to say no, to turn her away like she had turned her back on me for years. It would have been easy.
But something stopped me.
Maybe it was the way she looked, like a lost child, like I had looked the day I stood on this very doorstep, abandoned and alone. Or maybe it was something else. A part of me that still believed people could change. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned to Uncle James. He studied Sophia for a long moment before speaking. "You can stay," he said, "but under one condition." She nodded quickly. "Anything." "You work," he said simply. "You want to stay here? You earn your place. No handouts." I expected her to hesitate, to argue. But she didn't. She just nodded again, her shoulders slumping in relief. "Okay, I'll do whatever you need." And so, Sophia stayed. At first, it was awkward. We barely spoke, only exchanging words when necessary. But as time passed, I saw something shift in her. She worked in the factory, starting with the most basic tasks, cleaning, organizing, assisting with small projects. She wasn't naturally skilled at woodcraft, but she was good with numbers, and soon, she began handling sales, customer orders, and business planning. It was strange watching her struggle, seeing her fail and try again, something she had never had to do before. But she didn't quit. One day, as we were closing up the workshop, she turned to me. "I used to think I was better than you," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I thought because I was smarter in school, I was worth more. I was wrong." I didn't say anything. She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Evelyn." It was the first time she had ever apologized. The first time she had ever acknowledged what she had done. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her completely. But for the first time, I believed she truly meant it. Months passed, and Sophia became a part of our lives. We weren't sisters in the way normal siblings were, but we were rebuilding something real, something honest. Then one day the phone rang. Aunt Sarah answered, and her face twisted in disgust. She put the phone on speaker. "Evelyn." My mother's voice came through. "We need your help." I felt Sophia stiffen beside me. "We're in serious trouble," my father added. "We have no place to go. We need money. We can come live with you." I cut them off.
"No."
Silence. Then my mother's voice turned sharp. "Evelyn, we are your parents. You owe us." I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "I don't owe you anything." Sophia reached over and hung up the phone. We never heard from them again. Now, as I sit at the dinner table, surrounded by Uncle James, Aunt Sarah, and yes, even Sophia, I feel something I never thought I'd have.
Peace.
I may have lost the family I was born into, but I found the family I was meant to have. And for the first time in my life, I am truly happy. When I woke up in that hospital, I was alone. No visits. No calls. My brother saw my accident as a golden opportunity. He drained my accounts, sold my $3 million dream house for pocket change, and wasted it all on his doomed business, with my parents standing behind him. They thought I'd never return. But after a month, when I walked through that door, their faces weren't just shocked, they were terrified. I laughed at them because the house they sold was their biggest mistake. Life has a strange way of showing who truly stands by you when everything falls apart. I learned this the hard way. My name is Jessica Carter, and for years, I believed my family was my greatest support. I was wrong. What I thought was love turned out to be greed in disguise. They didn't just betray me, they erased me from their lives when they thought I was no longer useful. But they underestimated me. I grew up in Miami, Florida, in a well-off family. My grandfather, a successful businessman, always believed in me, while my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, favored my younger brother, Lucas. My grandfather saw potential in me. Before he passed away, he gifted me a $3 million luxury beach house, a place where I built my dreams, where I found peace away from the shadows of my family's favoritism. I worked hard, built my own business, and lived independently, refusing to depend on anyone. But Lucas was different. Lazy, irresponsible, and reckless, he never worked a day in his life. Instead, he dreamed of shortcuts to wealth, mostly illegal ones. My parents enabled him, always defending his mistakes, always making excuses for his failures. He was their golden boy, while I was the one expected to manage on my own. I never let that bother me, until the day I saw how far their greed could go. It started with a road accident.
I don't remember much from that day.
I was driving home after a long business meeting when out of nowhere, a speeding truck slammed into my car. The impact was devastating. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, barely alive. My body was broken, my strength drained, and my mind foggy from the painkillers. But the real pain? It wasn't physical. At first, I thought my family would be by my side. I was wrong. Days turned into weeks, and not a single one of them came to see me. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Lucas. It was as if I didn't exist. The only person who stayed with me was Dr. Ethan Walker, my childhood friend, and now my lifesaver. He refused to leave my side, making sure I had the best medical care. "You need to focus on getting better, Jessica," he would say every day, his voice full of determination. I wanted to believe he was right. But deep down, a voice whispered that something was wrong. My instincts were screaming at me, warning me that something terrible had happened while I was gone. Then one evening, Ethan finally told me the truth. He had been holding back, not wanting to stress me, but he knew I needed to hear it. "Jessica, I didn't want to tell you this before, but you need to know." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Your brother, he sold your beach house." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls around me were caving in. "What?" My voice was barely a whisper. "He forged documents while you were unconscious. He sold your beach house for way less than it's worth. And the worst part? He spent every penny on his illegal business, import and export of God knows what." I shook my head, unable to process it.
No.
That couldn't be true. My family wouldn't allow that, right? My parents wouldn't let him steal from me. Ethan's silence told me everything. They supported him, didn't they? My voice trembled with barely contained rage. Ethan sighed. "They didn't just support him, Jessica. They helped him." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the betrayal crushing me. My own blood had turned against me. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had stood by Lucas as he destroyed everything I built. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I couldn't afford to break.
Not now.
"How much money?" I forced myself to ask. Ethan's expression darkened. "All of it." He burned through the money like it was nothing. His business? A complete failure. He lost everything. I clenched my fists, feeling a cold rage settle in my chest. They thought I wouldn't come back. They assumed I was too weak to fight. They were wrong. I turned to Ethan, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Take me home. Jessica, you're not strong enough yet. I don't care. I cut him off. I need to see it with my own eyes. Ethan hesitated but finally nodded. All right, but I'm coming with you. The next morning, he helped me into his car, and we drove toward what was once my home. The drive felt endless, my heart pounding with every mile. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from the sheer fury building inside me. When we arrived, my worst nightmare was confirmed. My home was gone. The beach house that held years of memories, my grandfather's legacy, my safe place, it was no longer mine. In its place stood a sold sign mocking me. The house had been stripped of everything valuable, turned into someone else's possession. Ethan parked the car, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the ruins of my past life. Then I saw them. Lucas, my parents, laughing. They were sitting in the garden of our old family home, celebrating. As if nothing had happened. As if I had never existed. Something inside me snapped. I pushed the car door open and stepped out. The moment my mother's eyes met mine, the laughter died. My father's face paled. And Lucas? He froze. He looked at me as if he was seeing a ghost. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but deadly. Surprised to see me, Lucas? For a second, no one spoke. Then, Lucas forced a smile, but I could see the panic in his eyes. Jessica, we thought, he laughed nervously. We thought you weren't coming back. I took slow steps toward them. Oh, I came back. And now, we have a lot to talk about. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. I could see the guilt, the fear. They had thought I was gone forever. They had thought I would never come back to claim what was mine. But I was here, and I wasn't going anywhere. They had no idea what was coming for them. I stood there, staring at the faces of the people I once called family. Lucas, my mother, my father. They had no idea what to say, how to react, because in their minds I was never supposed to return. Lucas was the first to recover from the shock. He stood up quickly, forcing a smirk onto his face, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Jessica, look, we thought you weren't coming back, he said, as if that made everything okay. I felt my hands curl into fists, my nails digging into my palms, but I refused to show my anger. Not yet. You thought I wasn't coming back? I repeated, my voice eerily calm. So, that gave you the right to steal everything from me? Lucas shrugged, trying to appear casual. It wasn't like that. The house, it was just sitting there, Jess. We thought. I cut him off sharply, shifting my gaze toward my parents. My mother looked away, avoiding my eyes, and my father sat frozen, gripping the arms of his chair. They were guilty, and they knew it. I took a deep breath. I wouldn't let them manipulate me with their silence. I turned back to Lucas. Tell me, Lucas, how much did you sell my house for? He hesitated, but I already knew the answer. Half of its worth, wasn't it? I said before he could speak. You sold a $3 million luxury beach house for pennies. And what did you do with all that money? Lucas scoffed, crossing his arms. I invested it, he said defensively. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You mean you threw it all into your illegal business? That struck a nerve. His face twisted with anger. It was a good opportunity. I was going to make it big. You wouldn't understand. I understand perfectly. I stepped closer, my voice dropping into something cold. You took everything I built, everything Grandpa gave me, and you gambled it away like it meant nothing. Lucas clenched his jaw, but before he could respond, my father finally spoke. His voice was tight, defensive. Jessica, you need to understand. We thought you weren't coming back, he said, his words making my stomach turn. I looked at him, my own father, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. He hadn't just let this happen, he had encouraged it. You didn't even check if I was alive, I whispered, the weight of their betrayal settling deep in my chest. Not once. Not a single visit. Nothing. My mother finally raised her eyes, but there was no regret in them. "We had to look out for Lucas," she said simply. And there it was. The truth. Lucas had always been their priority. Their golden son. I shook my head. "And what about me? Your daughter?" My voice cracked slightly, but I quickly steadied it. "Or was I just an inconvenience to you?" My mother sighed, as if she was tired of this conversation. "Jessica, you always managed on your own. You never needed us." I let out a bitter laugh. "So, because I was independent, I didn't deserve a family?" I looked between them. "And that justifies what you did?" Lucas rolled his eyes.
Come on, Jess. Stop being dramatic.
"It's not like you can do anything about it now." That was his biggest mistake, thinking I was weak, thinking I wouldn't fight back. I straightened my posture, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "You really think I'm just going to walk away?" Lucas smirked. "What else can you do?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're going to find out." I turned on my heel and walked away, Ethan close behind me. I didn't need to argue with them anymore. I had wasted enough energy on people who never cared about me. As soon as we got into the car, Ethan let out a sharp breath. "Jessica, are you okay?" I turned to him, my jaw clenched.
No, Ethan.
"I'm not, but I will be." He nodded, understanding. "So, what's next?" I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. After 2 rings, a calm, professional voice answered. "Rachel Dawson speaking." I exhaled slowly. "Rachel, it's Jessica. I need your help." There was a brief pause. Then her voice turned sharp. "Tell me everything." And so I did. Every detail, every betrayal, every crime Lucas had committed. By the time I finished, Rachel's voice was steel. "They think they've won," she murmured. "But they don't realize they've left a trail of evidence a mile long. We can take them down." I nodded.
Good.
"Let's do it." Rachel wasted no time. The next morning, we met at her office. She spread out the documents in front of me. "First things first," she said. "The sale of your beach house was completely fraudulent. Your brother forged your signature." I wasn't surprised. "Can we get it back?" Rachel smirked. "Not just that. We can file criminal charges against him.
Fraud. Theft.
Illegal business dealings. And if your parents were involved," she trailed off, but I understood. "They wouldn't just lose me. They would lose everything." Ethan, who had been sitting beside me, crossed his arms. "Jessica, are you sure about this?" I turned to him. "They didn't hesitate to destroy me, Ethan. Why should I hesitate to get justice?" Rachel nodded approvingly. "I'll start the legal process immediately. But you need to be ready. This won't be easy." I straightened my shoulders. "I'm ready." For the first time in months, I felt in control again. I had lost everything, but I wasn't beaten. I was going to take it all back. And this time, they wouldn't see me coming. I spent the next few days preparing myself for the storm that was coming. Lucas and my parents had stolen everything from me, thinking I wouldn't fight back. They thought I was gone, but they didn't realize that I had come back stronger. With Rachel Dawson, my attorney, leading the legal charge, and Ethan by my side, I was ready to reclaim everything they had taken. Rachel worked fast. She filed a lawsuit against Lucas for fraud, forgery, and theft. She also launched an investigation into his so-called business. What she uncovered was even worse than I had expected. Lucas hadn't just lost all the money. He had used it to fund illegal imports and shady deals. His entire operation was built on deception and law-breaking. And the best part? He had left behind mountains of evidence. One afternoon, as I sat in Rachel's office reviewing the case details, she leaned forward, her sharp eyes locked onto mine. "Jessica, your parents knew everything," she said bluntly. "They didn't just support Lucas. They helped cover up his crimes." I felt my stomach drop, but deep down, I wasn't surprised. I had stopped expecting anything from them the moment they betrayed me. "Will they go down with him?" I asked, my voice steady. Rachel nodded. "If we push hard enough, yes. But I need to know, Do you want to press charges against them too? I stared at the pile of documents in front of me. These were the people who had abandoned me in a hospital bed. The ones who never once checked if I was alive, who spent my money and laughed as if I had never existed. They had already chosen their side. I lifted my eyes to meet Rachel's.
Yes.
I want them all to pay. Rachel smiled grimly. Then let's make it happen. The legal battle began, and it didn't take long for everything to start crumbling around them. Lucas was the first to get served with legal notice. When he received the lawsuit, he stormed into Rachel's office, demanding to speak with me. I agreed, not because I wanted to hear his excuses, but because I wanted to watch him squirm. The moment he walked in, he wasn't the arrogant brother who had mocked me the day I came home. He looked disheveled, desperate, his cocky smirk replaced by panic. "Jessica, come on," he started, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked. "This is all just a misunderstanding. We're family." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Funny. You didn't think about family when you sold my house, drained my accounts, and left me for dead." Lucas flinched. I was under pressure. "You have no idea how tough things were for me." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean running an illegal business was stressful?" His face turned red. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I thought I could fix it before you came back." I scoffed. "You thought I wouldn't come back, Lucas. You thought you could steal everything and get away with it." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Jess, please, I messed up. But we can fix this. I'll get the money back. Just drop the case." I tilted my head. "Get the money back? Lucas, you lost everything. And even if you could fix it, why should I let you? You showed me exactly where I stand in your life. Now I'm showing you where you stand in mine." His eyes darkened. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious." Lucas exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're making a mistake." "No, Lucas," I said coldly. "You did." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I didn't flinch. 2 days later, the police got involved. With the evidence Rachel had provided, the authorities began investigating Lucas's business. What they found was enough to put him behind bars for a long time. He had not only forged my signature, but also committed multiple counts of fraud and financial crimes. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The police showed up at my parents' house. I stood outside, watching as officers walked into the home where I had once spent my childhood. My mother and father came rushing out, confusion on their faces. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded. One of the officers turned to them. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, you're being investigated for aiding and abetting fraud." My mother gasped. "That's ridiculous. We didn't do anything." I stepped forward then, meeting their shocked eyes. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter they dismissed. I was the woman standing against them. "You knew what Lucas was doing," I said, my voice emotionless. "And you supported him. Now you get to face the consequences." My father's face hardened. "Jessica, you don't have to do this." I let out a dry laugh. "Neither did you. But you did it anyway." My mother shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "We're your parents." "You stopped being my parents the day you sold me out." The officers proceeded with their work, gathering evidence, questioning them. My parents weren't arrested yet, but their involvement was undeniable. They wouldn't walk away from this without consequences. Later that night, Ethan and I sat in my restored beach house, mine again legally. "You did it," he said, watching me closely. I nodded, staring at the ocean waves in the distance. "Not yet, but I will." Ethan leaned forward. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "Lighter," I admitted. "Like I can breathe again." He smiled. "Good. Because this isn't the end yet." I turned to him, determination in my eyes.
"No, Ethan."
"It's just the beginning." The trial against Lucas and my parents dragged on for weeks, but I never wavered. I had spent too much time being ignored, dismissed, and betrayed. Now I was finally in control, and I wasn't backing down. Lucas tried every trick in the book to escape the consequences. He played the victim, claimed he had been manipulated, blamed bad luck, even tried to guilt me into dropping the charges.
But it was too late for that.
The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, fake documents, illegal business dealings, and even recordings of his fraudulent transactions. One afternoon, as I sat in Rachel's office reviewing the final documents, she looked up at me with a small smirk. "He's running out of moves, Jessica. Lucas knows it's over." I nodded. He had destroyed himself. All I had done was shine a light on his crimes. The courtroom was silent the day the verdict was read. Lucas Carter, guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to several years in prison for fraud, forgery, and financial crimes. I didn't feel joy, just relief. But it wasn't over yet. My parents were next. Unlike Lucas, they hadn't committed direct fraud, but they had aided and abetted his crimes. The court found them complicit in covering up his illegal activities and benefiting from stolen money. Their punishment wasn't prison, but it was still severe, a massive financial penalty and a permanent mark on their records. I sat there, watching as my parents listened to the judge's ruling. They didn't look at me, didn't beg for forgiveness. Maybe they thought I was the monster for standing against them, but I didn't care anymore. When the case was over, I walked out of the courthouse with Ethan by my side. The air felt lighter. I had won, not just in court, but in life. I had reclaimed my home, my wealth, my name. But most importantly, I had reclaimed myself. The next day, my mother called me. It was the first time she had reached out since everything had happened. I stared at my phone, debating whether to answer. Finally, I picked up. "Jessica," she said softly. "I hope you're happy." Her words stung, but I didn't let them break me. "I am." She hesitated. "After everything we've been through, you still went through with it." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. "You left me in that hospital, Mom. You stood by Lucas while he stole from me. You spent my money like I never existed." Silence. I sighed. "Tell me, if I had never come back, would you have even cared?" More silence. I nodded to myself. That's what I thought. She didn't try to defend herself. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. "I hope you have a good life, Jessica," she whispered before hanging up. I stared at the phone for a long time, but I didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve. I had lost them long before I ever knew it. That evening, Ethan and I sat on the deck of my beach house, my home once again. The sun was setting, casting gold and pink streaks over the water. He studied me for a moment before speaking. "So, what now?" I smiled, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time.
"Peace."
"I move forward," I said simply. "Without them." Ethan nodded. "And if they ever try to come back?" I exhaled slowly. "Then they'll find out that some things can't be undone." We sat in comfortable silence, the waves crashing against the shore. The battle was over, and for the first time in my life, I was finally free. When the lawyer read my late uncle's will, my brother, greedy as ever, grabbed the $150,000 without blinking. All I got was an old, dusty toolbox. He laughed, thinking he won. But when I opened that toolbox, his smile disappeared because inside was something that changed everything. I've always believed that people leave behind more than just things when they pass. They leave behind pieces of themselves. My name is Maya Brooks, and this story begins the day I walked into a quiet law office in Asheville, North Carolina, after losing the only father figure I had left in my life, my Uncle Walter. I was 34 at the time, living a steady life as a local history teacher, deeply rooted in the very streets and stories of Asheville. I didn't have much in the way of glamour, but I had purpose. I had peace.
Until that day.
My brother Ethan showed up 10 minutes late, of course. That was just like him. 36, successful, sharp-suited, and always in a hurry. He'd flown in from New York City, where he worked as some high-powered marketing executive. We couldn't have been more different. Ethan chased wealth and prestige. I stayed behind, choosing to help care for Uncle Walter, even when it wasn't easy. I always believed love was measured by time, not money. When Ethan entered Mr. Reynolds' office, he barely looked at me. "Maya," he said, more like a greeting to a stranger than his sister. I gave him a small nod. I was used to the cold between us. Ever since he left Asheville, we drifted, our lives moving in opposite directions. I stayed grounded. He kept climbing. Mr. Reynolds, our uncle's longtime lawyer, cleared his throat and gestured for us to sit. Thank you both for coming. I know this is a difficult time. Your uncle left behind two main assets. One, a savings account with $150,000, and two, the apartment he lived in, along with its contents. Ethan's reaction was immediate. I'll take the money, he said, casually, like he was picking an item off a menu. I glanced at him. You don't even want to hear the rest? There's nothing else to hear. That place is falling apart. You want it? Be my guest. Mr. Reynolds raised a brow. Actually, Walter didn't assign who gets what. He wanted the two of you to decide.
Of course he did.
Uncle Walter never liked forcing choices. He believed in letting people show who they were. Ethan showed his hand instantly. The money. That's all he wanted. I'll take the apartment, I said quietly. I didn't even need to think about it. That place was more than peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. It was memories. It was home. As we stood to leave, Mr. Reynolds reached into his drawer and handed me something. Your uncle left this for you specifically. It was a small, worn-out leather keychain. Faded, but still holding a tiny brass tag. Storage C. He didn't say what it opened. Mr. Reynolds shook his head. Only that it was important. For your hands only. I slipped it into my coat pocket, unsure what it meant, but already feeling a sense of responsibility. 2 days later, I unlocked the apartment. Everything was just as he left it. Books stacked by the fireplace, his old flannel coat draped over a chair, the framed photo of my parents on the hallway wall. It smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco, the kind of smell you only notice when it's gone. I wandered through each room, touching objects like they were sacred. The creak of the floorboards, the chipped edges of furniture, even the light filtering through the dusty blinds, it all felt like pieces of him. I remembered the keychain and started searching. At the back of the bedroom closet, behind boxes and coats, I found a narrow metal cabinet labeled Storage C. I turned the key, and with a soft click, it opened. Inside was a wooden toolbox. Not the kind used for wrenches and nails, but something older, heavier. When I lifted the lid, my breath caught. There were neatly wrapped journals, a stack of vintage postcards tied with twine, and small tokens, some round like old coins, others square and etched with names of towns. There were also hand-drawn sketches of buildings I recognized from around Asheville, some gone, others barely hanging on. I sat on the carpet and opened one of the journals. My uncle's handwriting filled the pages. Observations, dates, memories, details about buildings, shops, people, and places that time had forgotten. At the top of one page, he had written, "If we don't remember where we came from, how can we know where we're going?" I closed the journal slowly, overwhelmed by emotion. He hadn't just been collecting these things, he'd been preserving them, documenting a living history.
For me.
Later that evening, I walked next door and knocked on Mrs. Langford's door. She was in her 70s, retired, and had lived in the building longer than anyone else. She used to bake us cookies when we were kids and help watch over me when Uncle Walter worked nights. "Oh, Maya," she said, pulling me into a warm hug. "It's been too long." "I found something," I told her and showed her one of the tokens and a postcard. Her eyes softened with recognition.
He talked about these.
Said every token held a piece of a story. He used to say Asheville's soul was hidden in attics and basements. He never told me about it, I admitted. He was saving it for the right time, she said with a smile. And for the right person. That night, I couldn't stop thinking. About the toolbox. About Uncle Walter's silent mission. I'd always loved history, but this was different. This was personal. He hadn't just given me an apartment. He'd left me a calling. I knew then I couldn't let it sit in a closet. These journals, these tokens, they needed to be seen, read, understood. People needed to know the stories they held. And maybe, just maybe, this old apartment could become something more. Of course, I had no idea what was coming next. Ethan had walked away without a second thought, but the past has a way of creeping back in. And his story with this place wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot.
I didn't sleep much after that night.
My mind was racing with possibilities, questions, and a strange mixture of excitement and fear. The journals, tokens, and postcards filled my thoughts like puzzle pieces. Uncle Walter had left behind something far greater than anyone realized, not just family memories, but the kind of legacy that could breathe life into the history of Asheville. It felt like he was guiding me, even in his absence. The next few days, I spent every free moment inside the apartment. I cleaned the dust from shelves, sorted through closets filled with old coats and boxes, and kept going back to the toolbox. Each journal I opened revealed more stories, some about the city, others about our family, even childhood memories of me and Ethan. One journal in particular had an entry about a small bakery that used to sit on Lexington Avenue. He'd written about the owner, how he used to give cookies to kids after school. That was the kind of detail you didn't find in history books. That was the heart of a place. It became clear to me that the apartment itself could be something more than just a place to live. I wanted to turn it into a kind of community exhibit, a living memory space. Something simple, maybe call it Heritage Loft. A place where people could come in, look through the collection, and remember what Asheville used to be. It wouldn't be fancy, just real. But I had no idea where to start. That's when I thought of Greg Martinez. He owned a local antique restoration shop, and he'd been a good friend of Uncle Walter's for years. I hadn't seen him since the funeral, but I remembered how kind he'd been. I walked into his shop one afternoon with a few of the tokens and sketches in hand. The smell of wood polish and old leather filled the air, and he looked up from behind a workbench, smiling in recognition. "Maya," he said, standing to greet me. "Haven't seen you since, well, you know." "I know. It's been a lot," I admitted. "I found something. Actually, I found a lot of somethings." I showed him a few of the sketches and told him what I wanted to do with the apartment. Greg listened carefully, nodding, his eyes wide with interest. "Your uncle always had an eye for detail," he said. "He talked about this idea once, you know? Turning his place into something like a museum. He said people were forgetting too much." "He never told me," I said, a little surprised. "He probably thought it wasn't time yet. But if you're ready to take it on, I'd love to help." His words meant more than I could say. Over the next few weeks, Greg helped me clean, fix, and slowly transform the apartment. He repaired the squeaky floorboards, restored some of the old furniture, and even built display shelves for the journals and items. I found comfort in the work and in the people who came by to offer support once word got around. Mrs. Langford brought in a few things of her own, photos, old newspaper clippings, even a hand-painted street map from the 1940s. Soon, others started donating small keepsakes, and before I knew it, Heritage Loft was starting to take shape. I wasn't doing it for attention, but the attention found me anyway. It started small. A local journalist visited, then a teacher brought her class. Visitors left handwritten notes about how much the place reminded them of their grandparents or childhood homes. One woman cried when she found a photo of a building her father once worked in. I didn't expect it to grow the way it did, but it warmed my heart to see people care. And then, of course, Ethan called. I hadn't heard from him since the day he took the money and left town. But now, suddenly, he wanted to talk. "So," he said on the phone, his voice calm but tight, "I've been hearing things about the apartment." I kept my tone even. "You mean Heritage Loft?" "Heritage what?" "It's what I've been working on. I turned the apartment into a community space. For people to learn about the history, see the things Uncle Walter collected." There was a pause on the line. Then he asked, "Are you making money off it?" I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was headed. "Not really. It's donation-based. Some people give what they can. Most of it goes back into repairs and upkeep. But it's getting attention, right? Media, schools, stuff like that." "Yes," I admitted. He laughed once, short and bitter. "Well, I hope you're planning to split that with me." "You took your share," I said firmly. "You wanted the money. I kept what you didn't want. And now it's worth something."
"No, Ethan."
"Now it means something." He didn't like that. I could hear it in the silence. Look, he said finally, I think we should talk in person. I don't think that's necessary. He hung up without another word. After that call, I couldn't shake the feeling in my chest, like a shadow creeping over everything I had built. A few days passed quietly, but then one morning, I came to the apartment and found the front window cracked, a small display table knocked over. A couple of old tokens had gone missing. At first, I thought it was just kids messing around, but the more I looked, the more it felt intentional. Someone had forced the lock, rummaged through the shelves. Nothing valuable was taken, not in the usual sense. Just enough to leave a message. Greg came over after I called him, and we went through everything together. This wasn't random, he said. Whoever did this knew where to look. Do you think it was Ethan? I asked, afraid to hear the answer. I don't know, but maybe you should start keeping records. Security cameras, too. I nodded slowly. I hated the idea, but he was right. A few days later, Mr. Reynolds called. Maya, he said, you need to come to my office. Something's come up. When I arrived, he looked serious. A private investigator I work with found something. Surveillance footage. It shows someone breaking into the apartment the night before the damage. We got a clear shot of the license plate. And it's registered to a man from out of town. He's known to do freelance work, dirty work. And we have strong reason to believe Ethan hired him. I sat there, stunned. He wanted to scare you, Mr. Reynolds continued. Maybe force you to shut down the project or sell the place. My stomach turned. It was one thing to argue over money. It was another to try to destroy something so personal, so meaningful. He didn't just want to cut. He wanted to erase everything I was building. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about inheritance. It never was. This was about legacy, and some people would rather burn it down than let someone else protect it. It's strange how people can look you in the eye and still plan your downfall behind your back, especially when that person is your own brother. After Mr. Reynolds told me what the investigator had found, I just sat there in silence, feeling like something had shattered deep inside me. The man who broke into the apartment had been hired. Hired. I didn't want to believe it. But everything made sense now. The way the lock had been forced, how only meaningful items were disturbed. It was calculated. It wasn't about theft. It was a warning. Do we have proof? I asked quietly. We have the footage, the man's confession, and a paper trail linking a payment to Ethan's account, Mr. Reynolds said. It's strong enough for a legal case. I didn't even know how to feel. Angry? Betrayed? Hurt? All of it was tangled together inside me. I had spent weeks building something beautiful out of love and memory, and Ethan had tried to destroy it for what? Because he thought he was owed more? I walked back to the apartment that day with heavy steps. When I opened the door, the familiar scent of old books and polished wood greeted me, but it didn't feel warm. It felt violated. The cracks in the glass, the disturbed shelves, the missing items. It was like someone had tried to tear away part of Uncle Walter's soul. Greg showed up a few minutes later, his arms full of new tools and a determined look on his face. We're fixing everything, he said simply. And we're making it stronger. He installed a proper alarm system and added reinforced locks. We bought a camera to monitor the entrance and windows. Mrs. Langford brought over a new display case, and even some local students volunteered to help recatalog the items. It wasn't just about security anymore, it was about reclaiming the space. About not letting fear take away what mattered. One afternoon, while I was reorganizing a few postcards, a couple walked in. They had driven in from Charlotte after reading about Heritage Loft in a blog post. I used to live in this building when I was a kid, the man said, walking around with misty eyes. This brings back everything. Moments like that reminded me why I was doing this. It wasn't just for Uncle Walter. It was for the people who still cared about where they came from, for the stories left behind in dusty corners. But as the days passed, I kept wondering what Ethan would do next. I hadn't heard from him since the break-in. Maybe he thought I wouldn't find out. Maybe he thought I'd be too scared to fight back. But he underestimated me. Mr. Reynolds moved quickly. A formal complaint was filed. The man Ethan hired had already agreed to testify. The case would go to trial within weeks. The charges? conspiracy, vandalism, and property damage. Ethan tried to reach out. He called once, left a message that said, "You're blowing this out of proportion." I didn't call him back. There was nothing left to say. The trial was short, but intense. I sat quietly in the courtroom, dressed in simple clothes, watching as Ethan was brought in by his lawyer. He didn't look at me until the evidence started rolling in. Photos of the damage, footage of the hired man entering the apartment, and finally, bank statements linking the payment to Ethan's account. He looked pale, thinner than I remembered. Maybe guilt had caught up to him, or maybe it was just fear. When the hired man testified, describing how he was paid to mess the place up enough to scare her into shutting it down, I saw Ethan lower his head. The judge didn't take long. The final sentence was 7 years in prison and a $300,000 fine for damages and emotional harm. I should have felt satisfied. Justice was served, wasn't it? But as I watched Ethan being led away in handcuffs, all I felt was a deep, quiet sadness. He was my brother. We shared childhood memories, bedtime stories, laughter in this very apartment. Somewhere along the way, he had let ambition and greed blind him to all of that. And now it had cost him everything. After the trial, I returned to Heritage Loft and sat alone in the quiet. I picked up one of Uncle Walter's journals and flipped through a few pages. One entry caught my eye. It was written in the year I turned 10. Maya has a gentle heart. She notices things others miss. She listens. She remembers. I hope someday she finds what she's meant to do with those gifts. Tears welled in my eyes.
He had seen this in me long before I had.
Maybe this, preserving history, honoring voices, connecting the past to the present, maybe this was what I was meant to do all along. Word of the trial and Heritage Loft's story spread quickly. Local media picked it up, then regional outlets. Suddenly, we were getting calls from schools, authors, even travel bloggers. One weekend, a well-known historical society visited and offered to help with funding and preservation efforts. Greg and I expanded the displays, added guided tours, and even held weekend workshops on old map reading, letter writing, and preserving family heirlooms. People brought their own items and stories, hoping to contribute. It was beautiful. It was alive. Mrs. Langford became our unofficial greeter, sitting by the front with tea and a notebook. Greg fixed things before they even broke. And I woke up every day feeling like I had a purpose. But the betrayal still lingered in my chest like a bruise. Some nights I'd sit by the window and wonder what Ethan was doing. If he regretted it. If he missed anything about this place, about us. I didn't know. And maybe I never would. One evening, as I was closing up, I found a small envelope slid under the door. No name, no return address. Inside was one of the missing tokens, one that had vanished during the break-in. It was clean, carefully wrapped, almost like someone wanted me to know they hadn't forgotten. I didn't tell anyone. I just put the token back in its place. Heritage Loft wasn't just surviving. It was becoming a symbol, a place where people came to remember and maybe even heal. And yet, something told me the story wasn't over. Not entirely. Life didn't return to normal after the trial. It became something new. Something deeper. Heritage Loft was no longer just a project or a tribute. It had grown into a place where memories found a voice, where strangers became friends, and where the past walked alongside the present. Every room, every shelf, every carefully displayed token held a story. And I, somehow, had become the keeper of them all. In the months following Ethan's sentencing, the support from the community was overwhelming. Volunteers came forward to help with events. School groups made regular visits. We hosted our first story day, where visitors could bring old letters, photos, or heirlooms and share the stories behind them. Some were funny, some heartbreaking, but all were valuable. I remember one man bringing an rusted harmonica that once belonged to his grandfather, a jazz musician in the 1930s. He played a note on it, and the entire room fell silent. That's when I realized this was more than a museum. It was a living heartbeat of shared memory. Greg had become my right hand. He was there for every repair, every idea, every quiet moment when I needed a friend. We didn't talk much about Ethan. There wasn't much to say, but his absence lingered in the corners of the apartment, especially at night when the rooms grew still. I often wondered if he thought about this place, if he felt remorse, or if the bitterness still ate at him. Then came the letter. It arrived 6 months after the sentencing, addressed to me in Ethan's handwriting. I sat alone in the yellow armchair, Uncle Walter's favorite, and carefully opened the envelope. The first line read, "I don't expect you to forgive me." He wrote that prison had forced him to stop running for the first time in years. He had been alone with his thoughts, with his guilt, and with memories of our childhood that he'd tried to bury under ambition. He didn't defend what he did. He didn't make excuses. He just told the truth. "I saw you building something out of love and history, and it scared me," he wrote, "because I realized I had nothing like that. All my success that felt hollow. And you, with that broken-down apartment and old books, had more peace than I ever did." I sat there a long time, just staring at the paper. He ended the letter by saying he hoped, someday, he could visit Heritage Loft, not as its co-heir, but as a student, ready to learn what he'd missed. I didn't cry. I just felt still. The next day, I shared the letter with Mrs. Langford and Greg. "That's something," Greg said softly. "He didn't have to write that." "No," I said, folding the letter carefully. "But I'm glad he did." Life moved forward, slowly but steadily. Heritage Loft became more than just local. It was featured in a national magazine about community-led preservation. A small grant came in to help fund a digital archive. We hired 2 part-time assistants to help manage the growing collection. I began to see the apartment not as a place to hold on to the past, but as a place that helped people understand it. And through that understanding, they found meaning in their own lives. The legacy Uncle Walter left behind wasn't just in journals and tokens. It was in the values he planted in me. Respect, memory, purpose. One evening, after everyone had gone, I sat in the yellow armchair again, reading one of the last journals I hadn't yet touched. Inside was a note written on a folded piece of paper, separate from the pages. "Maya, if you've made it this far, then I know you've found what you were meant to find. Thank you for seeing the worth in what others overlooked." My breath caught. He had known, all along. I looked around the room, at the old photographs, the softly glowing lamps, the shelves full of voices long past, and I felt a peace settle in my chest. This was home. Not just for me, but for everyone who walked through that door carrying a piece of their history. The night ended quietly, with the streetlights casting long shadows through the windows. I locked up, turned out the lights, and whispered a soft goodnight to the apartment. Some stories end with a final word. Mine didn't, because the thing about legacy is it lives on, in the hands that protect it, in the hearts that believe in it, and in the silence between the pages, where love waits to be remembered. My sister accidentally sent me a video, my parents mocking me, calling me a clueless ATM and a foolish girl. Hurt, I cut off the $5,000 I'd been sending them every month. Days later, they stormed in furious. My mom slapped me, screaming, "Why did you stop the money?" I stayed quiet and laughed. They had no idea what a mistake they had made. I used to believe that helping your family, especially your parents, was the most natural, noble thing you could do. For years, I lived by that belief. My name is Alyssa Monroe. I'm 38 years old, a tech entrepreneur based in Austin, Texas, and for over 5 years, I sent my parents $5,000 every single month. No questions asked. No expectations. Just a daughter doing her part. They told me it was for medical bills, for the mortgage, for emergencies. My dad, Douglas, had retired from real estate years ago, and my mom, Martha, used to be a schoolteacher before stepping away due to health reasons. I was doing well with my business, better than I ever expected, so it felt only right to help them. My younger sister Chloe, who's 7 years younger and still trying to make it as a freelance designer, also leaned on me from time to time. Business loans, rent, design tools, whenever she asked, I sent. At first, I didn't think twice about it. That's just who I was. The reliable one. The successful daughter who never said no. Every time they needed something, I gave. Every time Chloe called in tears about a client who hadn't paid, or a landlord threatening eviction, I transferred money. I'd even postponed buying my dream house to continue supporting them. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that family comes first. But I didn't realize that while I was busy playing savior, they were playing me. Everything changed at a family barbecue on a hot Sunday afternoon in July. My parents hosted it in their backyard, the one I assumed they were renting, since they'd always claimed they couldn't afford a down payment. Chloe had come in from out of town, and we were all enjoying burgers and awkward small talk. I remember thinking, for once, we looked like a normal, happy family. Until my phone buzzed. It was from Chloe. A video. At first, I thought it might have been a group shot from the party. But when I opened it, I froze. It wasn't meant for me. In the video, Chloe was sitting in what looked like my parents' living room, laughing alongside Mom and Dad. They didn't know they were being recorded, or maybe they didn't care. Chloe was holding the phone selfie style, and they were all smiling like they'd just heard the best joke in the world. "She's our walking blank check," Chloe said, laughing. "I told you," Dad added, shaking his head. "Fake a hospital visit, and she sends cash before you can say copay." "She cries if she thinks we're struggling," Mom chimed in. "Send her a sad voice note, and boom, $5,000. Every time." "Seriously," Chloe snorted. "She still thinks you're renting this place." My entire body went cold. I watched it twice, just to make sure I heard right. My parents. My own sister. Joking about me like I was a clueless aim, calling me names. Laughing at my kindness. I didn't say anything at the party. I couldn't. I was too stunned. But as I drove home that night, I saw everything clearly. The fake emergencies. The exaggerated sob stories. The guilt trips. None of it had been real. That night, I sat on my bed and made one of the clearest decisions of my life. I cut off the money. I didn't call to explain. I didn't reply to their usual end-of-the-month reminders. I just stopped. 3 days later, the storm hit. First came the texts. "Did the transfer bounce? Did you forget this month? Everything okay?" I ignored them. Then the calls, first Chloe, then Mom, then Dad. I let them all go to voicemail. I couldn't stomach the thought of hearing their voices pretending everything was fine. And then they showed up. It was early evening. I had just wrapped a call with one of my developers when I heard the doorbell. I checked the camera.
It was them.
All three. My stomach dropped. I should have turned off the lights and pretended I wasn't home. But some foolish part of me still needed to face them. I opened the door. "What the hell is going on?" My dad barked the second he saw me. "No warning, no message? You just stopped sending money," Mom added, her face twisted with rage. "You saw the video," Chloe muttered under her breath, her eyes darting away from mine. "I did," I said quietly, holding my ground. "And I heard everything you said about me." "So what?" Dad snapped. "We were joking." "Joking," I repeated. "You called me a blank check. You bragged about manipulating me." "You're being dramatic," Mom spat. "You think you're better than us now? Because you make more money." I didn't say anything. I just stared at them. And that silence? It drove them mad. Then it happened. In a sudden burst of anger, Mom raised her hand and slapped me across the face. Hard. "You ungrateful little girl," she screamed. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't yell back. I just stood there. Because what they didn't know, what they never even thought to guess, was that the entire thing was being recorded. Every word, every threat, every slap. I had installed a discreet security camera in the corner of my living room months ago after a break-in scare. It had captured everything in crystal clear HD. I closed the door behind them without another word. And as their angry voices faded down my driveway, I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and hit play. Their betrayal wasn't just personal anymore, it was evidence. And I wasn't just heartbroken. I was ready to make them regret underestimating me. After they left my house that night, I sat in silence for a long time. My cheek was still stinging from the slap, but that wasn't what hurt the most. It was the realization that my own family, people I had bent over backwards to support, saw me as nothing more than a money machine, a walking blank check. And worse, they were comfortable saying that out loud, laughing about it, thinking I'd never find out. But I had. And now I had evidence.
I didn't react right away.
I wasn't about to throw a tantrum or confront them emotionally.
No.
I'd done that in the past, and it had always ended with me apologizing me for caring too much. This time I was going to be smart.
Cold even.
Because now it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about justice. I called the only person I trusted to help me think straight, Aunt Lorraine, my dad's sister. She lived in Seattle and had been mostly out of the family picture for years. I'd always assumed she just liked her space, but that night, I found out the truth. When I told her everything, the video, the slap, the years of financial support, she wasn't surprised. Not even a little. They did the same thing to me 20 years ago, she said calmly. Not to the same degree, but the guilt, the manipulation, the fake helplessness, it's their pattern. You're kidding, I whispered, stunned. I wish I was. I cut them off back then. They turned the entire family against me, but I've never regretted it. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She reminded me that this wasn't my fault, that I hadn't failed them, they had failed me. And then she gave me the best advice I'd heard in years. Don't let them keep writing your story. Take the pen back. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The next morning, I called Megan, my attorney and close friend. I told her everything. She didn't even try to hide her outrage. Please tell me you still have that video, she said. I do. And the camera footage too from the slap.
Good.
That's emotional abuse and assault on top of everything else. Megan helped me map out the plan. First, we'd document everything, every bank transfer, every fake emergency text, every guilt trip voicemail. I had years of digital trails. Second, we'd verify the financial side. I pulled up statements showing more than $300,000 in total money sent over the last 5.5 years. Third, we'd preserve all digital evidence and back it up to cloud storage, just in case they tried to do something crazy, like sue me for cutting them off. You never know with people like that. While Megan worked on the legal angles, I began preparing the truth. I wasn't looking for sympathy or drama. I just wanted to expose the truth, especially to the people in my circle who had always seen my family as picture perfect. My team, my business partners, even some of my close friends, I had to show them what was really going on. I wanted control of my own narrative for once. So I sat down and wrote. I detailed the years of support, the sacrifices I'd made, and how I believed every sad story my parents and Chloe told me. I described the night I got the video, how they mocked me, and how the confrontation ended with my own mother striking me in my home. I embedded clips from the video and the security footage, not the full thing, just enough to show it was real. No editing, no dramatizing, just the truth. Then I posted it all to my blog. And I shared the link on my personal social media pages with a simple message. Sometimes, the people you love the most turn out to be the ones who never saw you as a person, just a resource. This is my story. Within hours, the post blew up. At first, it was just a few shares and some shocked comments from friends. Then strangers started reading it. It was being shared in groups, tweeted, blogged about. People wrote to me telling their own stories of being used, manipulated, and betrayed by their families.
It was heartbreaking.
But it was also empowering. I wasn't alone. And then the media caught on. A local Austin news outlet reached out for an interview. I declined, but they still ran the story using the public blog post. The headline read, "Successful entrepreneur cuts off family after discovering shocking betrayal." That's when everything really exploded. Within days, the rest of the world knew exactly who Douglas, Martha, and Chloe Monroe were. And more importantly, what they'd done. They, of course, were furious. They tried to contact me, but I'd already blocked their numbers and emails. They even created new accounts to message me, begging me to take everything down. "Think about the damage you're causing," one message said. "No," I whispered to myself, "you caused this. I'm just showing the receipts." Then came the threats. Legal action. Accusations. Claims that I had twisted the story, taken things out of context. that the video was a joke, that the slap was an accident. But none of it mattered, because I had the evidence. That's when Megan filed the official legal complaint. Fraud, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and physical assault. We had enough to make a real case, and we did. The day they got served must have been a nightmare for them. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt peaceful.
Calm.
Like I had finally taken back something that had been stolen from me a long time ago. My voice. They thought I'd stay quiet, that I'd keep giving, that I'd forgive again, like always. But I wasn't the same Alyssa anymore.
And I wasn't finished.
Not even close. Filing the lawsuit was the beginning of the end, for them, at least. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Megan walked me through every step of the process, making sure we had everything in order. She said we had a solid case, and from the reactions I'd seen online, people clearly believed the truth. But deep down, I wasn't doing this for sympathy or attention. I was doing this for myself, for the version of me that spent years putting everyone else's needs before my own and getting used in return. Once the paperwork was filed and processed, we received confirmation. They were officially under investigation. Charges were being considered for fraud, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and assault. Just reading those words in black and white felt surreal. These were my parents, my sister, people who were supposed to protect me, not become the ones I needed protection from. Of course, they didn't take the news well. They showed up at my house again. This time it was just my parents, no Chloe. It was early evening, and I had just returned from a short walk when I saw their car parked in my driveway. My stomach turned. I almost turned around, but I reminded myself, I'm not afraid of them anymore. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. They looked tired, disheveled. The polished appearances I was so used to seeing, gone. My dad's face was red with anger, and my mom looked like she'd been crying for days. We need to talk, my father growled. No, I said, blocking the doorway. You need to leave. This is insane, Alyssa, my mother said, stepping forward. How could you do this to your own family? I didn't flinch. How could you do what you did and think you'd get away with it? We were joking, my dad snapped. You're ruining our lives over some harmless teasing. Harmless. I repeated, my voice calm. Mocking me behind my back, stealing from me, slapping me in my own home. Does that sound harmless to you? My mom's lips tightened. You're overreacting. You always have. Everything we did was out of necessity. I shook my head slowly. You bought a condo, joined a country club, and took vacations while telling me you couldn't pay for medication. It wasn't like that. Enough. I cut her off. I don't owe you an explanation. And unless you're here to admit what you did and take accountability, there's nothing more to say. They stood there in silence, shocked that I wasn't budging. Eventually they turned and left. But not before my father said one last thing. You'll regret this, Alyssa. Family is everything. You've just thrown yours away. I closed the door without responding. In the days that followed, things escalated. Chloe finally reached out, not with an apology, but with a demand. She sent me a long email blaming me for tearing the family apart. She said she'd lost clients, her reputation was in ruins, and she couldn't believe I'd go this far. There was no acknowledgement of the video. No mention of the things she said. Just deflection, excuses, and finger-pointing. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on what came next. Megan helped me work with a forensic accountant to track where all my money had gone. The findings were shocking, even to me. Nearly every transfer I'd made over the past 5 years, more than $330,000, had gone into personal luxuries, designer clothes, high-end electronics, lavish getaways. My father had even made payments on a second car I didn't know they had. The truth wasn't just hurtful, it was infuriating. Meanwhile, the investigation moved quickly. Thanks to the overwhelming evidence, it wasn't long before the authorities stepped in. One morning, Megan called me and said, "They've been arrested." I froze. What? They arrested your parents this morning.
Chloe too.
Fraud, financial abuse, assault, everything we documented. They're being held for questioning. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. Relief? Shock? Sadness? It was all jumbled together. I sat down on my couch, staring at nothing, as the weight of everything finally started to lift. They were actually being held accountable. The news spread quickly. The same media outlets that picked up my original blog post were now reporting the arrests. Headlines like "Family Arrested After Daughter Exposes Long-Term Fraud" started popping up online. I didn't comment publicly anymore. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and it was doing its job. In the following weeks, things changed. They lost the condo. It went into foreclosure after missed mortgage payments. Their bank accounts were frozen. Chloe's design business shut down completely after sponsors and clients pulled away. According to a friend of a friend, my parents were now living in a small rental property outside of town, something well below their usual standards. For the first time, they were living within their means. But I wasn't celebrating their downfall.
That wasn't what this was about for me.
I wasn't out for revenge just to see them suffer. I wanted the cycle to stop. I wanted to take control of my life again, to stop being the person everyone leaned on while secretly laughing behind my back. That's why I started something new. I used my experience, my platform, and my pain to create a nonprofit for people like me, adults who had been financially manipulated or emotionally abused by their families. It started small, a support group, some online resources, a hotline. But it grew fast.
People needed it.
People needed to feel seen and heard, just like I had. A few months after the arrests, I got a letter in the mail.
Handwritten.
No return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was from my mother. It was 4 pages long, filled with half apologies and emotional pleas. She said they were sorry, but also said they didn't know how else to survive. She talked about being embarrassed, humiliated, ashamed of how far things had gone. At the end, she asked for forgiveness. I stared at the pages, trying to feel something.
Anything.
Anger.
Sadness. Pity.
But I didn't feel any of it. Just clarity. They were finally facing consequences. And I was finally free. But I also knew, deep down, that this story wasn't quite over yet. The letter from my mother stayed on my desk for days. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I also couldn't bring myself to respond. It wasn't just the words, it was everything that had led to those words. All the lies, the fake emergencies, the manipulation,
The slap.
the mockery. And even now, after everything had come crashing down, the letter still tried to shift the blame. We didn't know how else to survive.
As if that justified what they did.
As if taking advantage of me was their only option. I knew better now. Their court case went to trial 6 weeks after their arrest. It was surreal walking into that courtroom and seeing them sitting on the other side, my own family wearing formal clothes like they were trying to appear respectable. My father barely looked at me. My mother glanced over once, but when our eyes met, she quickly looked away. Chloe stared straight ahead the entire time, expression stiff, like she was just waiting for it to be over. The prosecutors did their job well. They laid everything out. The money trail, the false claims, the recorded conversations, the security footage. It wasn't just a family squabble. It was documented financial abuse. And when the footage of the slap played on the courtroom screen, I heard a gasp from someone in the gallery. It echoed the one I'd let out when I first watched it myself. The room fell completely silent after that. My statement came near the end. I was nervous at first. My hands were shaking, but the second I started speaking, everything poured out of me. I talked about how much I'd loved my family, how I believed every word they said for years, how I'd put my own dreams on hold to help them, and how I found out the truth, not through a confrontation or a confession, but through a video that was never meant for me. I was their daughter, I said. Not a bank. Not a blank check. And when I finally stopped giving, they showed me exactly who they were. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliberate. All 3, my mother, my father, and Chloe, were found guilty.
Fraud.
Financial exploitation. Assault. They didn't get long prison sentences, 2 years each, plus restitution, but it was enough. Enough to validate everything I had been through. Enough to make it clear that what they did was wrong. That I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't overreacting. After the verdict, I stepped outside the courthouse and took the deepest breath I'd taken in years. The weight I had carried for so long, it didn't disappear completely, but it got lighter. Manageable. Like I could finally move forward. The next few months were quiet. Peaceful even. For the first time, I didn't have to brace myself every time my phone rang. I didn't wake up to guilt-tripping texts or calls asking for money. I focused on my business, my nonprofit, and my own healing. I spent time with people who loved me without expecting anything in return. I learned to trust again, slowly, carefully. My nonprofit began to grow. More people started coming forward with their stories. People who had been used by family, manipulated into silence, made to feel guilty for setting boundaries. Some of their stories were even worse than mine. Decades of abuse, hundreds of thousands stolen, entire lives dictated by guilt. But there was something powerful in the connection. In knowing you're not alone. We launched a campaign called More Than Blood, sharing real stories anonymously to shed light on financial abuse within families. The response was overwhelming. Survivors reached out, therapists offered to volunteer, even lawyers like Megan joined to provide free consultations. We weren't just talking about the problem anymore, we were helping people find their way out of it. A year passed. I didn't hear from my parents or Chloe again after the trial. I knew they were serving time, but I didn't follow the details. I didn't need to. I had my closure. Not the kind where everything is tied up with a pretty bow, but the kind where you finally stop bleeding. And then one morning I got a message. It was from a former family friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She told me that my parents were being released early for good behavior, and that Chloe had already been out for a few weeks. I stared at the message for a long time. A few days later, I came home to find a familiar car parked near the curb. My stomach flipped. I didn't want drama. I didn't want a scene. But I was ready, stronger, smarter, and no longer afraid. I walked up the driveway and saw them, my parents, standing on my porch, looking older, thinner, more worn than I'd ever seen them. Chloe wasn't there. They didn't say anything right away. Just watched me approach, waiting for some kind of sign. When I got close enough, my mother finally spoke. "We just want to talk," she said softly. I didn't answer. "We've lost everything," my father added. "The house, the car, our friends. We've paid the price." "You didn't pay," I said calmly. "You served time. There's a difference." "We're sorry, Alyssa," my mother said. "Truly. We've had time to think. We were wrong." "Not just wrong," I replied. "Cruel, calculated, and selfish." My father sighed. "We're not asking for money. We're asking for a chance to fix things." "I spent years giving you chances," I said. "And every time, you took more than I offered. This time, I'm choosing myself." "We're your parents," my mother whispered, eyes glossy. "Family." I shook my head. "Family doesn't destroy you and call it love. Family doesn't see your kindness as weakness." I walked past them and opened my door. "You can go now," I said quietly. "There's nothing left here for you." They didn't follow. After a moment, I heard their footsteps retreat down the path. The car door closed. The engine started. And then they were gone. I stood in the doorway for a moment, the wind brushing against my skin, and smiled to myself. Because in the end, I got my justice. Not just in the courtroom, but in my heart. I took back control of my life. I exposed the truth. I stopped the cycle. And for the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. Not because they were gone, but because I had finally chosen me. My sister accidentally sent me a video. My parents mocking me, calling me a clueless ATM and a foolish girl. Hurt, I cut off the $5,000 I'd been sending them every month. Days later, they stormed in furious. My mom slapped me, screaming, "Why did you stop the money?" I stayed quiet and laughed. They had no idea what a mistake they had made. I used to believe that helping your family, especially your parents, was the most natural, noble thing you could do. For years, I lived by that belief. My name is Alyssa Monroe. I'm 38 years old, a tech entrepreneur based in Austin, Texas, and for over 5 years, I sent my parents $5,000 every single month. No questions asked. No expectations. Just a daughter doing her part. They told me it was for medical bills, for the mortgage, for emergencies. My dad, Douglas, had retired from real estate years ago, and my mom, Martha, used to be a schoolteacher before stepping away due to health reasons. I was doing well with my business, better than I ever expected, so it felt only right to help them. My younger sister Chloe, who's 7 years younger and still trying to make it as a freelance designer, also leaned on me from time to time. Business loans, rent, design tools, whenever she asked, I sent. At first, I didn't think twice about it. That's just who I was. The reliable one. The successful daughter who never said no. Every time they needed something, I gave. Every time Chloe called in tears about a client who hadn't paid, or a landlord threatening eviction, I transferred money. I'd even postponed buying my dream house to continue supporting them. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that family comes first. But I didn't realize that while I was busy playing savior, they were playing me. Everything changed at a family barbecue on a hot Sunday afternoon in July. My parents hosted it in their backyard, the one I assumed they were renting, since they'd always claimed they couldn't afford a down payment. Chloe had come in from out of town, and we were all enjoying burgers and awkward small talk. I remember thinking, for once, we looked like a normal, happy family. Until my phone buzzed. It was from Chloe. A video. At first, I thought it might have been a group shot from the party. But when I opened it, I froze. It wasn't meant for me. In the video, Chloe was sitting in what looked like my parents' living room, laughing alongside Mom and Dad. They didn't know they were being recorded, or maybe they didn't care. Chloe was holding the phone selfie style, and they were all smiling like they'd just heard the best joke in the world. "She's our walking blank check," Chloe said, laughing. "I told you," Dad added, shaking his head. "Fake a hospital visit, and she sends cash before you can say copay. She cries if she thinks we're struggling," Mom chimed in. "Send her a sad voice note, and boom, $5,000. Every time." "Seriously," Chloe snorted. "She still thinks you're renting this place." My entire body went cold. I watched it twice, just to make sure I heard right. My parents, my own sister, joking about me like I was a clueless aim, calling me names, laughing at my kindness. I didn't say anything at the party. I couldn't. I was too stunned. But as I drove home that night, I saw everything clearly. The fake emergencies, the exaggerated sob stories, the guilt trips. None of it had been real. That night, I sat on my bed and made one of the clearest decisions of my life. I cut off the money. I didn't call to explain. I didn't reply to their usual end-of-the-month reminders. I just stopped. 3 days later, the storm hit. First came the texts. "Did the transfer bounce? Did you forget this month? Everything okay?" I ignored them. Then the calls, first Chloe, then Mom, then Dad. I let them all go to voicemail. I couldn't stomach the thought of hearing their voices pretending everything was fine. And then they showed up. It was early evening. I had just wrapped a call with one of my developers when I heard the doorbell. I checked the camera.
It was them.
All three. My stomach dropped. I should have turned off the lights and pretended I wasn't home. But some foolish part of me still needed to face them. I opened the door. "What the hell is going on?" My dad barked the second he saw me. "No warning, no message? You just stopped sending money," Mom added, her face twisted with rage. "You saw the video," Chloe muttered under her breath, her eyes darting away from mine. "I did," I said quietly, holding my ground. "And I heard everything you said about me." "So what?" Dad snapped. "We were joking." "Joking?" I repeated. "You called me a blank check. You bragged about manipulating me." "You're being dramatic," Mom spat. "You think you're better than us now? Because you make more money." I didn't say anything. I just stared at them. And that silence? It drove them mad. Then it happened. In a sudden burst of anger, Mom raised her hand and slapped me across the face. Hard. "You ungrateful little girl," she screamed. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't yell back. I just stood there. Because what they didn't know, what they never even thought to guess, was that the entire thing was being recorded. Every word, every threat, every slap. I had installed a discreet security camera in the corner of my living room months ago after a break-in scare. It had captured everything in crystal clear HD. I closed the door behind them without another word. And as their angry voices faded down my driveway, I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and hit play. Their betrayal wasn't just personal anymore, it was evidence. And I wasn't just heartbroken. I was ready to make them regret underestimating me. After they left my house that night, I sat in silence for a long time. My cheek was still stinging from the slap, but that wasn't what hurt the most. It was the realization that my own family, people I had bent over backwards to support, saw me as nothing more than a money machine. A walking blank check. And worse, they were comfortable saying that out loud, laughing about it, thinking I'd never find out. But I had. And now I had evidence.
I didn't react right away.
I wasn't about to throw a tantrum or confront them emotionally.
No.
I'd done that in the past, and it had always ended with me apologizing me for caring too much. This time I was going to be smart.
Cold even.
Because now it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about justice. I called the only person I trusted to help me think straight, Aunt Lorraine, my dad's sister. She lived in Seattle and had been mostly out of the family picture for years. I'd always assumed she just liked her space. But that night, I found out the truth. When I told her everything, the video, the slap, the years of financial support, she wasn't surprised. Not even a little. They did the same thing to me 20 years ago, she said calmly. Not to the same degree, but the guilt, the manipulation, the fake helplessness, it's their pattern. You're kidding, I whispered, stunned. I wish I was. I cut them off back then. They turned the entire family against me, but I've never regretted it. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She reminded me that this wasn't my fault, that I hadn't failed them, they had failed me. And then she gave me the best advice I'd heard in years. Don't let them keep writing your story. Take the pen back. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The next morning, I called Megan, my attorney and close friend. I told her everything. She didn't even try to hide her outrage. Please tell me you still have that video, she said. I do. And the camera footage too from the slap.
Good.
That's emotional abuse and assault on top of everything else. Megan helped me map out the plan. First, we'd document everything, every bank transfer, every fake emergency text, every guilt trip voicemail. I had years of digital trails. Second, we'd verify the financial side. I pulled up statements showing more than $300,000 in total money sent over the last 5.5 years. Third, we'd preserve all digital evidence and back it up to cloud storage, just in case they tried to do something crazy, like sue me for cutting them off. You never know with people like that. While Megan worked on the legal angles, I began preparing the truth. I wasn't looking for sympathy or drama. I just wanted to expose the truth, especially to the people in my circle who had always seen my family as picture perfect. My team, my business partners, even some of my close friends, I had to show them what was really going on. I wanted control of my own narrative for once. So I sat down and wrote. I detailed the years of support, the sacrifices I'd made, and how I believed every sad story my parents and Chloe told me. I described the night I got the video, how they mocked me, and how the confrontation ended with my own mother striking me in my home. I embedded clips from the video and the security footage, not the full thing, just enough to show it was real. No editing, no dramatizing, just the truth. Then I posted it all to my blog. And I shared the link on my personal social media pages with a simple message. Sometimes, the people you love the most turn out to be the ones who never saw you as a person, just a resource. This is my story. Within hours, the post blew up. At first, it was just a few shares and some shocked comments from friends. Then strangers started reading it. It was being shared in groups, tweeted, blogged about. People wrote to me telling their own stories of being used, manipulated, and betrayed by their families.
It was heartbreaking.
But it was also empowering. I wasn't alone. And then the media caught on. A local Austin news outlet reached out for an interview. I declined, but they still ran the story using the public blog post. The headline read, "Successful entrepreneur cuts off family after discovering shocking betrayal." That's when everything really exploded. Within days, the rest of the world knew exactly who Douglas, Martha, and Chloe Monroe were. And more importantly, what they'd done. They, of course, were furious. They tried to contact me, but I'd already blocked their numbers and emails. They even created new accounts to message me, begging me to take everything down. "Think about the damage you're causing," one message said. "No," I whispered to myself. "You caused this. I'm just showing the receipts." Then came the threats. Legal action. Accusations. Claims that I had twisted the story, taken things out of context. That the video was a joke. That the slap was an accident. But none of it mattered, because I had the evidence. That's when Megan filed the official legal complaint. Fraud, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and physical assault. We had enough to make a real case, and we did. The day they got served must have been a nightmare for them. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt peaceful.
Calm.
Like I had finally taken back something that had been stolen from me a long time ago. My voice. They thought I'd stay quiet. That I'd keep giving. That I'd forgive again, like always. But I wasn't the same Alyssa anymore.
And I wasn't finished.
Not even close. Filing the lawsuit was the beginning of the end, for them, at least. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Megan walked me through every step of the process, making sure we had everything in order. She said we had a solid case, and from the reactions I'd seen online, people clearly believed the truth. But deep down, I wasn't doing this for sympathy or attention. I was doing this for myself, for the version of me that spent years putting everyone else's needs before my own and getting used in return. Once the paperwork was filed and processed, we received confirmation. They were officially under investigation. Charges were being considered for fraud, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and assault. Just reading those words in black and white felt surreal. These were my parents, my sister, people who were supposed to protect me, not become the ones I needed protection from. Of course, they didn't take the news well. They showed up at my house again. This time it was just my parents, no Chloe. It was early evening, and I had just returned from a short walk when I saw their car parked in my driveway. My stomach turned. I almost turned around, but I reminded myself, I'm not afraid of them anymore. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. They looked tired, disheveled. The polished appearances I was so used to seeing, gone. My dad's face was red with anger, and my mom looked like she'd been crying for days. "We need to talk," my father growled. "No," I said, blocking the doorway. "You need to leave." "This is insane, Alyssa," my mother said, stepping forward. "How could you do this to your own family?" I didn't flinch. "How could you do what you did and think you'd get away with it?" "We were joking," my dad snapped. "You're ruining our lives over some harmless teasing." "Harmless," I repeated, my voice calm. "Mocking me behind my back, stealing from me, slapping me in my own home. Does that sound harmless to you?" My mom's lips tightened. "You're overreacting. You always have. Everything we did was out of necessity." I shook my head slowly. "You bought a condo, joined a country club, and took vacations while telling me you couldn't pay for medication. It wasn't like that. Enough." I cut her off. "I don't owe you an explanation. And unless you're here to admit what you did and take accountability, there's nothing more to say." They stood there in silence, shocked that I wasn't budging. Eventually they turned and left. But not before my father said one last thing. "You'll regret this, Alyssa. Family is everything. You've just thrown yours away." I closed the door without responding. In the days that followed, things escalated. Chloe finally reached out, not with an apology, but with a demand. She sent me a long email blaming me for tearing the family apart. She said she'd lost clients, her reputation was in ruins, and she couldn't believe I'd go this far. There was no acknowledgement of the video. No mention of the things she said. Just deflection, excuses, and finger-pointing. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on what came next. Megan helped me work with a forensic accountant to track where all my money had gone. The findings were shocking, even to me. Nearly every transfer I'd made over the past 5 years, more than $330,000, had gone into personal luxuries, designer clothes, high-end electronics, lavish getaways. My father had even made payments on a second car I didn't know they had. The truth wasn't just hurtful, it was infuriating. Meanwhile, the investigation moved quickly. Thanks to the overwhelming evidence, it wasn't long before the authorities stepped in. One morning, Megan called me and said, "They've been arrested." I froze. What? They arrested your parents this morning.
Chloe too.
Fraud, financial abuse, assault, everything we documented. They're being held for questioning. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. Relief? Shock? Sadness? It was all jumbled together. I sat down on my couch, staring at nothing, as the weight of everything finally started to lift. They were actually being held accountable. The news spread quickly. The same media outlets that picked up my original blog post were now reporting the arrests. Headlines like "Family Arrested After Daughter Exposes Long-Term Fraud" started popping up online. I didn't comment publicly anymore. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and it was doing its job. In the following weeks, things changed. They lost the condo. It went into foreclosure after missed mortgage payments. Their bank accounts were frozen. Chloe's design business shut down completely after sponsors and clients pulled away. According to a friend of a friend, my parents were now living in a small rental property outside of town, something well below their usual standards. For the first time, they were living within their means. But I wasn't celebrating their downfall.
That wasn't what this was about for me.
I wasn't out for revenge just to see them suffer. I wanted the cycle to stop. I wanted to take control of my life again, to stop being the person everyone leaned on while secretly laughing behind my back. That's why I started something new. I used my experience, my platform, and my pain to create a nonprofit for people like me, adults who had been financially manipulated or emotionally abused by their families. It started small, a support group, some online resources, a hotline. But it grew fast.
People needed it.
People needed to feel seen and heard, just like I had. A few months after the arrests, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was from my mother. It was 4 pages long, filled with half apologies and emotional pleas. She said they were sorry, but also said they didn't know how else to survive. She talked about being embarrassed, humiliated, ashamed of how far things had gone. At the end, she asked for forgiveness. I stared at the pages, trying to feel something.
Anything.
Anger.
Sadness. Pity.
But I didn't feel any of it. Just clarity. They were finally facing consequences. And I was finally free. But I also knew, deep down, that this story wasn't quite over yet. The letter from my mother stayed on my desk for days. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I also couldn't bring myself to respond. It wasn't just the words, it was everything that had led to those words. All the lies, the fake emergencies, the manipulation,
The slap.
the mockery. And even now, after everything had come crashing down, the letter still tried to shift the blame. We didn't know how else to survive. As if that justified what they did. As if taking advantage of me was their only option. I knew better now. Their court case went to trial 6 weeks after their arrest. It was surreal walking into that courtroom and seeing them sitting on the other side, my own family wearing formal clothes like they were trying to appear respectable. My father barely looked at me. My mother glanced over once, but when our eyes met, she quickly looked away. Chloe stared straight ahead the entire time, expression stiff, like she was just waiting for it to be over. The prosecutors did their job well. They laid everything out. The money trail, the false claims, the recorded conversations, the security footage. It wasn't just a family squabble, it was documented financial abuse. And when the footage of the slap played on the courtroom screen, I heard a gasp from someone in the gallery. It echoed the one I'd let out when I first watched it myself. The room fell completely silent after that. My statement came near the end. I was nervous at first, My hands were shaking, but the second I started speaking, everything poured out of me. I talked about how much I'd loved my family, how I believed every word they said for years, how I'd put my own dreams on hold to help them, and how I found out the truth, not through a confrontation or a confession, but through a video that was never meant for me. I was their daughter, I said. Not a bank. Not a blank check. And when I finally stopped giving, they showed me exactly who they were. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliberate. All three, my mother, my father, and Chloe, were found guilty.
Fraud.
Financial exploitation. Assault. They didn't get long prison sentences, 2 years each, plus restitution, but it was enough. Enough to validate everything I had been through. Enough to make it clear that what they did was wrong. That I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't overreacting. After the verdict, I stepped outside the courthouse and took the deepest breath I'd taken in years. The weight I had carried for so long, it didn't disappear completely, but it got lighter. Manageable. Like I could finally move forward. The next few months were quiet. Peaceful even. For the first time, I didn't have to brace myself every time my phone rang. I didn't wake up to guilt-tripping texts or calls asking for money. I focused on my business, my nonprofit, and my own healing. I spent time with people who loved me without expecting anything in return. I learned to trust again, slowly, carefully. My nonprofit began to grow. More people started coming forward with their stories. People who had been used by family, manipulated into silence, made to feel guilty for setting boundaries. Some of their stories were even worse than mine. Decades of abuse, hundreds of thousands stolen, entire lives dictated by guilt. But there was something powerful in the connection. In knowing you're not alone. We launched a campaign called More Than Blood, sharing real stories anonymously to shed light on financial abuse within families. The response was overwhelming. Survivors reached out, therapists offered to volunteer, even lawyers like Megan joined to provide free consultations. We weren't just talking about the problem anymore, we were helping people find their way out of it. A year passed. I didn't hear from my parents or Chloe again after the trial. I knew they were serving time, but I didn't follow the details. I didn't need to. I had my closure. Not the kind where everything is tied up with a pretty bow, but the kind where you finally stop bleeding. And then one morning I got a message. It was from a former family friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She told me that my parents were being released early for good behavior, and that Chloe had already been out for a few weeks. I stared at the message for a long time. A few days later, I came home to find a familiar car parked near the curb. My stomach flipped. I didn't want drama. I didn't want a scene. But I was ready, stronger, smarter, and no longer afraid. I walked up the driveway and saw them, my parents, standing on my porch, looking older, thinner, more worn than I'd ever seen them. Chloe wasn't there. They didn't say anything right away. Just watched me approach, waiting for some kind of sign. When I got close enough, my mother finally spoke. "We just want to talk," she said softly. I didn't answer. "We've lost everything," my father added. "The house, the car, our friends. We've paid the price." "You didn't pay," I said calmly. "You served time. There's a difference." "We're sorry, Alyssa," my mother said. "Truly. We've had time to think. We were wrong." "Not just wrong," I replied. "Cruel, calculated, and selfish." My father sighed. "We're not asking for money. We're asking for a chance to fix things." "I spent years giving you chances," I said. "And every time, you took more than I offered. This time, I'm choosing myself." "We're your parents," my mother whispered, eyes glossy. "Family." I shook my head. Family doesn't destroy you and call it love. Family doesn't see your kindness as weakness. I walked past them and opened my door. "You can go now," I said quietly. "There's nothing left here for you." They didn't follow. After a moment, I heard their footsteps retreat down the path. The car door closed. The engine started. And then they were gone. I stood in the doorway for a moment, the wind brushing against my skin, and smiled to myself. Because in the end, I got my justice. Not just in the courtroom, but in my heart. I took back control of my life. I exposed the truth. I stopped the cycle. And for the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. Not because they were gone, but because I had finally chosen me. After a heated argument, my husband pushed me down the stairs. Badly injured and unconscious, my 8-year-old son bravely called for help. At the hospital, my husband stormed in, grabbed my arm, and, in a fit of rage, punched my injury. The pain was unbearable, but what happened next was truly shocking. I used to believe in fairy tales. The idea that love could be enough, that the right person could make life beautiful, that once you found them, everything would fall into place. That was the dream I held on to when I met Ryan. He was everything I thought I wanted: confident, charming, attentive. He knew how to make me feel special, how to say the right things at the right time. I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame, completely unaware that the warmth I felt in the beginning would one day turn into something that would burn me alive. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. I was grading papers back when I was still a teacher, and he sat at the table next to me. He struck up a conversation, effortlessly weaving his way into my world. I remember how he made me laugh, how he told me he admired my dedication to shaping young minds. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. A year later, we were married. I left my job to support Ryan's dream, his own business, something he swore would provide us with a better future. He convinced me that it made sense for me to focus on our home, on the family we would build together. I believed him. I trusted that he wanted the best for us. In the beginning, it even felt right. I loved making our house a home, preparing meals for us, and imagining the life we were going to create. Then slowly things began to change. At first, it was subtle, little comments that made me doubt myself. "You didn't clean properly today," or "What do you even do all day?" They weren't cruel, not yet, but they planted tiny seeds of doubt in my mind. I started questioning myself, wondering if I really was doing enough. I worked harder, keeping the house spotless, making sure dinner was always ready on time, avoiding anything that might upset him. Then Noah was born, and for a while, things got better. Holding my baby boy in my arms gave me a sense of purpose I had never felt before. I poured all my love into him, determined to be the best mother I could be. Ryan seemed happy, too, at least in the beginning. But then, the stress of his business failures began to weigh on him, and suddenly, I became his punching bag. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. His words cut deeper than any wound ever could. "You're lucky I put up with you. If it weren't for me, you'd have nothing. You're a terrible wife. Useless." At first, I tried to fight back. I told him how much I was doing, how hard I worked to keep everything running smoothly. But he always had an answer. He made me feel small, worthless, like I was failing at the only thing I was supposed to be good at, being his wife and Noah's mother. And then came the anger, the outbursts. He started snapping at Noah, too. My sweet, innocent boy, who only wanted his father's love. Ryan would scold him over the smallest things, leaving his toys out, talking too loudly, asking too many questions. I did my best to shield Noah, to step in before Ryan's temper flared, but it only made things worse. "Stop babying him, Lily," Ryan would sneer. "Maybe if you disciplined him properly, I wouldn't have to step in." It didn't matter what I said. Ryan always had an excuse. It was always my fault. I told myself I could handle it, that if I just tried harder, if I was a better wife, things would get better. But the truth was, Ryan didn't want a wife. He wanted a servant, someone to control. Then everything changed one night. The night I finally saw him for what he really was. It had been a long day. Noah had been sick, and I had barely slept the night before. I was exhausted, running on fumes, but I still made dinner, still made sure the house was in order before Ryan got home. But when he walked in, he was already in a bad mood. Another failed business deal, another excuse to take his frustration out on me. I barely had time to say hello before he started. "Why is dinner late?" he snapped. "It's not," I said softly, trying to keep the peace. "It's right here." Don't talk back to me, Lily, he warned, his eyes dark with something I had learned to fear. Noah was sitting at the table, watching everything with wide eyes. I forced a smile and said, "Let's just eat, okay?" But Ryan wasn't interested in dinner. He wanted to fight. "You don't do anything all day, and you can't even have dinner ready on time?" he spat. I wanted to tell him how I had been taking care of our sick child, how I had been running on no sleep, how I had done everything I could to keep things together, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing I said would ever be enough. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "I asked you a question," he growled. Noah let out a small, scared whimper. My heart clenched. I couldn't let him see this. "Ryan, please," I whispered. Not in front of Noah. That was the wrong thing to say. His eyes flashed with rage. The next thing I knew, I was falling. My feet slipped, and suddenly, I was tumbling down the stairs. I don't remember the moment I hit the ground. Only the sharp pain that shot through my body, the sound of Noah screaming, and then darkness. When I woke up, everything hurt. My head was pounding, my arm felt like it was on fire, and the bright lights of the hospital room made it hard to focus. My mother's face was the first thing I saw. She was sitting by my bedside, her eyes red from crying. "Mom," I croaked, my voice weak. She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe now." But I wasn't, because Ryan hadn't been arrested. He hadn't been punished. And I knew, as long as he was free, I would never truly be safe. I wanted to believe it was an accident, that maybe I had just lost my balance, that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But deep down, I knew the truth. Ryan had pushed me, and that meant it would only get worse. The pain in my arm was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I had spent years making excuses for Ryan, convincing myself that his anger wasn't really his fault, that he was just stressed, that he would change. But lying in that hospital bed, staring at the bruises on my arms, I finally saw the truth. I was trapped in a cycle that would never end unless I did something about it.
Noah.
I needed to get out for him. I couldn't let my son grow up thinking this was normal. That love was supposed to hurt. That a father was supposed to make his family afraid. My parents had been there when I woke up, their faces filled with worry. My mother kept brushing my hair back, whispering, "You're safe, sweetheart." But I wasn't safe. Not yet. Ryan didn't show up for 2 days. 2 whole days without a single phone call, a single message. And then, just when I started to believe he might not come at all, he walked in. I should have expected his reaction. The moment he stepped into the room, his face twisted in annoyance, not concern. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just stood there, shaking his head like I had inconvenienced him. "Are you done with this drama now?" he said, his voice low but sharp. I blinked at him, my throat dry. "What?" "You heard me." He stepped closer, his eyes dark. "You're lying here, making a big deal out of nothing, while I'm the one left dealing with everything at home." Everything inside me froze. He didn't care. Not even a little. "Ryan, I fell down the stairs," I said, my voice shaking. He scoffed. "Yeah, and whose fault is that?" I stared at him, my body numb. Was he seriously blaming me? Did he really think I had done this to myself? "You need to get up, Lily. Let's go." "I can't just leave. I have a fractured arm, and my head." "Oh, come on." He let out a bitter laugh. "This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea how much this is costing us? I don't have money to waste on hospital bills because you can't be careful." Tears burned my eyes. I had spent years making myself small, staying quiet to avoid making him angry. But this was beyond cruel. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's face darkened. He stepped closer, gripping my uninjured arm. "You don't get to decide that." I sucked in a breath. He was going to drag me out of the hospital if he had to. He didn't care if I was in pain. He didn't care if I was hurt. "Let go of me," I whispered. "Lily."
Let
"Go." A voice cut through the tension. "Step away from her." We both turned. A nurse stood in the doorway, her face pale but firm. And next to her, a police officer. Ryan's grip loosened instantly. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, putting on that fake, charming smile he used with other people. "She's my wife." The officer didn't move. "I don't care who you are. If you don't step back right now, I will escort you out." For a moment, Ryan didn't move. His jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. But then, with a deep breath, he let go of me and took a step back. "We'll talk later," he muttered before turning and walking out of the room. I felt my whole body collapse into the bed, as if I had been holding my breath this entire time. The nurse rushed to my side, checking my arm. "Are you okay?" I nodded weakly. "That man shouldn't be anywhere near you," she said softly. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. She was right. Ryan had already taken so much from me. If I let him, he would take more. My freedom, my sanity, maybe even my life. I had to stop this. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. With the help of my parents, I filed a police report. My mother held my hand the entire time as I recounted everything, every cruel word, every time he had grabbed me, every moment I had been too afraid to fight back. The officer listened carefully, taking notes. He didn't question me.
He didn't doubt me.
"You're doing the right thing," he said. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that. The next few days were a blur. My parents took Noah home with them while I stayed in the hospital for further observation. Ryan called.
And called. And called.
First, he was angry. "How dare you file a report against me?" Then he tried to play the victim. "Lily, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion." Then came the fake apologies. "I didn't mean it. You know I love you." But I didn't answer. Sophia, my lawyer, was the one who advised me to ignore him. I met her through a domestic abuse support organization my mother had contacted. She was fierce, confident, and made it clear that I had more power than I thought. "Ryan will try to manipulate you," she warned. "He'll say whatever he can to make you doubt yourself. But don't listen. You have a case against him, and I'm going to make sure he faces consequences." I wanted to believe her, but part of me still feared him. Then one evening, I received a message that made my blood run cold. It was a voicemail from Ryan. "You think you can just walk away from me?" His voice was calm, too calm. "You're going to regret this, Lily. You have no idea what you've started." I sat there, my hands shaking. This wasn't just an empty threat. This was war. And, for the first time, I was ready to fight back. I had spent years letting Ryan control me, letting him make me feel small, weak, incapable. But something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was the way he had grabbed me in that hospital room, or the way he had looked at me as if I was nothing but a problem he had to deal with. Maybe it was the way he had threatened me in that voicemail, his voice laced with quiet, simmering rage. Whatever it was, I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. Sophia told me that abusers like Ryan thrived on fear. They relied on their victims being too scared to fight back. That's why he was trying so hard to break me down with his messages, switching between threats and fake apologies, hoping I would cave in, hoping I would give up and come crawling back. But I wasn't the same woman I had been before that fall. I had woken up in that hospital bed a different person, a person who had seen just how little Ryan cared if I lived or died. I couldn't ignore his threats, though. Sophia advised me to document everything, to keep every voicemail, every message, every attempt he made to intimidate me. She was determined to make sure he faced the consequences. "We have a strong case, Lily," she said, "but we need to be prepared for the kind of games he'll play." She wasn't wrong. A week after filing the report, I received another voicemail. This time, his tone was softer. "Lily, I don't know what's happening to us," he said, his voice filled with forced sadness. "I know I've made mistakes, but can't we just talk? Can't we fix this?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it.
Talk.
Ryan had spent years making sure my voice didn't matter, and now he wanted to talk? I didn't respond. I knew exactly what this was, just another tactic. He wanted me to let my guard down. And when I didn't answer, his next message was full of anger. "You think you can do this to me? You think you can take my son away from me? You're nothing without me, Lily. You hear me? Nothing." I forwarded every voicemail to Sophia. She assured me that this was only helping our case, proving just how dangerous Ryan really was. Still, the fear never fully left me. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. Every time I heard footsteps outside my parents' house, I held my breath. What if he showed up? What if he found a way to hurt me again? The night I finally let myself break down, Noah was already asleep in my parents' guest room. My mother found me sitting on the couch, staring at my phone with tears running down my face. "He won't stop," I whispered. "What if he never stops?" She sat down beside me and wrapped her arms around me like she used to when I was a child. "You're not alone in this, Lily," she said softly. "We're here. Sophia is here. You are stronger than you know, sweetheart." For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe her. The court date was set. I knew Ryan would try to make himself look like the victim. That was his specialty, convincing people that he was the one who had been wronged. But I had something he didn't have, the truth. When I walked into the courtroom, my hands were trembling. I had prepared myself for this moment, but nothing could have truly prepared me for the sight of Ryan sitting there, looking as confident as ever. He was wearing his best suit, his hair neatly styled, his expression calm and controlled. It made my stomach turn. He still thought he was in control. Sophia gave me a reassuring nod as we took our seats. "Just tell the truth," she whispered. "That's all you need to do." The trial started with the prosecution laying out the case against Ryan. The nurse from the hospital testified first, describing how she had witnessed him grabbing me, how she had seen the fear in my eyes. Then the police officer who had removed him from the room took the stand, explaining how Ryan had resisted leaving and how aggressive he had been. Ryan's lawyer tried to downplay everything. "My client was simply frustrated," he argued. "He had been dealing with a difficult situation. He never meant to harm his wife." Sophia stood up then, her voice firm. "And yet, he did harm her. He verbally and physically assaulted her. We have evidence of his continued harassment, including threats made after she left him." That's when she played the voicemails. Hearing his own words echo through the silent courtroom made Ryan shift uncomfortably in his seat. His confident demeanor faltered just a little. I kept my eyes on him the whole time, watching as he clenched his jaw, as his fingers tightened into fists on the table. Then it was my turn to speak. I took a deep breath and walked to the witness stand. My hands shook as I placed them on my lap, but I didn't let the fear control me. I looked at the judge, then at Ryan, and I spoke my truth. I told them everything about the slow, creeping control, the way his words had chipped away at me over the years, about the way he had started snapping at Noah, the way I had spent years walking on eggshells, terrified of setting him off. And then I described the night I fell, how he had grabbed me, how I had lost my balance, how he hadn't even bothered to help me when I lay broken at the bottom of the stairs. Ryan's lawyer tried to shake me. "Mrs. Collins, isn't it possible you simply lost your footing? That this was an accident?" I met his gaze head-on. "No," I said, my voice steady. "It wasn't an accident." The cross-examination ended shortly after that. I had told the truth, and no amount of twisting words could change that. When the judge called for a recess, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Sophia squeezed my hand. "You did amazing," she said. I glanced over at Ryan. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight. For the first time, he looked afraid. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath as we waited for the verdict. I sat there, my hands clasped together tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan hadn't looked at me once since I had finished my testimony. Maybe for the first time in his life, he realized he had lost control over me, that he couldn't intimidate me into silence anymore. The judge returned, and everyone stood. The moment of truth had arrived. I barely heard the legal formalities as the judge spoke, but the words that mattered hit me like a wave. Based on the evidence provided and the testimonies heard, the defendant, Ryan Collins, is found guilty of domestic assault and harassment. He is hereby sentenced to 2 years in prison and is required to pay financial compensation to the victim. The moment the gavel struck, sealing the verdict, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. My body trembled, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming weight of relief. It was over. Ryan stood frozen, his face drained of color. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he barely reacted. The officers approached to take him into custody. That's when he finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Fear. Not for me, but for himself. "You'll regret this, Lily," he hissed as they led him away. But for the first time in my life, his words didn't scare me. I met his gaze, my voice steady.
No, Ryan.
"I won't." Afterward, my parents hugged me tightly, my mother crying tears of relief. Sophia patted my shoulder and said, "You did it, Lily. You got justice." I nodded, but deep inside, I knew that justice wasn't just about Ryan going to prison. It was about finally taking back my life. The first night in my new apartment felt surreal. Noah was already asleep in his bed, safe and peaceful. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls of this small, unfamiliar space, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for the next storm to hit. I was free. But freedom didn't mean everything was suddenly perfect. The emotional wounds still lingered. Some nights, I woke up in a panic, my heart racing as if I expected Ryan to still be there, yelling, grabbing my arm, making me feel small. But then I would hear Noah's soft breathing in the next room, and I'd remind myself he's gone. He can't hurt us anymore. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to rebuild, to find myself again. That's when I started writing. At first, it was just for me a way to process everything, to make sense of the years I had lost. But then one night, I decided to share my story. I started a blog, writing about what I had been through, about how I had found the strength to leave. I didn't expect much. I thought maybe a handful of people would read it. But within weeks, my inbox was flooded. Messages from women, some in situations just like mine, some who had escaped, some who had never spoken about their abuse before. They told me that reading my words made them feel seen, that it gave them hope. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose again. I kept writing, kept sharing. Soon, my blog turned into a community, a space where survivors could speak without fear, where they could find support and resources to escape their own nightmares. I worked with organizations that helped victims of domestic violence. I connected with lawyers, therapists, and shelters, using my platform to guide women toward the help they needed. And as my blog grew, so did my confidence. One evening, as Noah and I sat on the couch watching his favorite show, he turned to me and said, "Mom, you're smiling more now." His words caught me off guard. I hadn't even realized it. "I am?" I asked. He nodded.
Yeah, you used to look sad a lot.
"But now you look happy." Tears filled my eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "I am happy, sweetheart," I whispered, "because we're finally safe." It took time, but I built a new life for us. I became financially independent, something Ryan had once made me believe I could never be. I made new friends, ones who knew me as Lily, the survivor, not Lily, the broken wife. I no longer lived in fear. Ryan was gone, but he no longer had power over me. I was no longer the woman he had tried to break. I was stronger,
Wiser. Free.
and I would never, ever be silent again. My parents called me a burden, cut off my college funds, and told me to survive on my own. They demanded I pay for my dropout sister's lifestyle, and when I refused, they threw me out. 8 years later, at my sister's wedding, they laughed at me, saying a disowned girl had no future. But then, her fiancé slammed his glass down, turned to them, and said, "Do you even know who she is now?" As I stepped into the grand ballroom of the oceanfront resort in Los Angeles, I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. The chandeliers sparkled above, and the hum of conversation filled the air, but none of it made me feel at ease. I wasn't here for pleasure. I was here because Ethan, my husband, had business connections with Ryan Green, the groom. If it weren't for Ethan's involvement in Ryan's real estate projects, I would never have set foot in this place. Not because I wasn't invited, but because the bride was my estranged sister, Madison Green. I never thought I'd see her again. Not after 8 years. Ethan, ever the calm and composed man he was, squeezed my hand gently as we moved through the crowd. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. I forced a small smile. "I'll be fine," I whispered. But I wasn't sure if that was true. The moment we entered, I felt it, the stares, the murmurs, whispers of my name laced with disdain and mockery. At first, I ignored them, focusing on walking beside Ethan as we made our way to our seats. But then, I heard a voice that made my stomach twist. Why is she here? After all these years, she still dares to show up? She's nothing but a failure. A burden. I froze. My mother's voice. And then another. More like a disgrace, a sickeningly familiar voice added. Madison. I can't believe she's here. What does she want? To ruin my wedding? I felt my heartbeat quicken, but I didn't turn around. They didn't deserve my attention. But my mother and sister weren't the type to speak softly. They wanted me to hear them. I clenched my fists, trying to block out the memories. The night they disowned me. I had spent my whole childhood in their shadows. My parents worshipped Madison, pampered her, and poured every penny into her future. Meanwhile, I was just the extra daughter, the one they kept around but never truly cared for. When it was time for me to attend college, I had high hopes.
I was smart.
I had good grades. I was ready. But my parents crushed my dreams in a single conversation. You don't need college, Charlotte. Madison does. My father had told me, his tone leaving no room for argument. She's going to do something great with her life. You, on the other hand, it's time you contribute. Contribute. I had repeated, stunned. Yes, my mother had chimed in. You're an adult now. Start working. You'll help support Madison's studies and her lifestyle. They weren't just refusing to fund my education. They were ordering me to work and give my earnings to Madison. I had refused. I had no choice but to refuse. And for that, they threw me out. That was 8 years ago. 8 long years of struggle. I had left home with nothing but a few clothes and a heart full of determination. I worked endless hours, juggling multiple jobs just to survive. But I had something Madison never had, grit. I refused to crumble. I studied on my own, found opportunities, and eventually built my own company in the tech industry. Now, I was a CEO, a successful woman who had built her empire from scratch. And yet, standing in this ballroom, hearing their voices again, I realized they still saw me as the nobody they threw away. Ethan must have sensed my tension because he wrapped an arm around my waist protectively. You don't have to stay, he murmured. I know, I said. But something inside me refused to run. I had done nothing wrong. If anyone should feel ashamed, it was them. At that moment, another voice joined the conversation behind me. Ryan. What's going on? He asked, his voice puzzled. Ryan, you won't believe it. Madison's voice rang out, filled with exaggerated distress. My estranged sister is here. The one I told you about. The disgrace. I turned then, finally facing them. Madison's expression was twisted with fake shock and outrage, but I could see the flicker of something else beneath it. Fear. She hadn't expected me to show up. Ryan, however, looked stunned. His eyes darted between me and Madison as if trying to piece together a puzzle that suddenly didn't make sense. Wait, your sister? Ryan asked, his brow furrowing. Charlotte Carter? Madison's confidence wavered for a split second. Why, yes, she stammered. I told you about her. The one who? The CEO? Ryan cut her off, his expression shifting. The color drained from Madison's face. Ethan, standing beside me, smirked slightly. He knew exactly what was happening. Ryan wasn't just some random businessman, he was well-connected. And he knew who I was. I tilted my head slightly. That's right, I said, my voice calm. Charlotte Carter, CEO of Carter Innovations. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Ryan's shock turned into something else, realization. He looked back at Madison, who was visibly panicked now. You told me she was a failure, Ryan said slowly. You said she was useless, that she was a burden. Madison opened and closed her mouth, but no words came out. She had lied, and Ryan had just figured it out. I held Ryan's gaze for a moment before turning to Madison. You always did love rewriting history, I said softly. But the truth has a funny way of catching up, doesn't it? Madison's hands clenched into fists, her face turning red with fury. You don't belong here, she snapped. Neither do you, I replied smoothly. Because if I recall, this venue is owned by Carter Enterprises. And Ethan has an office here. Madison's eyes widened in horror. She hadn't known. This resort, the place she chose for her grand wedding, was partially owned by my husband's company. The irony was delicious. I didn't wait for her response. Instead, I turned to Ethan and smiled. Shall we get a drink? Ethan chuckled, his eyes filled with pride. Absolutely. As we walked away, I could still feel Madison's burning glare on my back. But it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one who felt small. And that was just the beginning. I could still feel Madison's burning glare on my back as Ethan and I walked toward the bar. The weight of the moment lingered, but I refused to let it pull me down. I had been through worse. My past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. Ethan ordered a drink, keeping his arm around me as if silently reminding me he was there. I exhaled slowly, pushing away the emotions that threatened to surface. I had faced Madison and my mother again after 8 years. The moment I had dreaded had come, and yet I was still standing. Charlotte. I turned at the sound of my name, finding Ryan standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Madison lingered near the entrance, still glaring, while my mother spoke in hushed but frantic whispers to my father. The perfect family image they had always projected was starting to crack. Ryan hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. I had no idea you were you, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. When Madison talked about you, she made it seem like you were some kind of nobody. I smiled, though there was no humor in it. That's how she always saw me, I said. How they all did. Ethan's grip on his glass tightened. He hated hearing how they treated me. He had always told me he wished he had met me sooner, that he would have taken me away from them years ago. But I had to build myself up on my own. Ryan looked between me and Ethan, realization setting in. Madison told me she had a successful older sister, he admitted. But she said you married into your success, that you latched onto a wealthy man and lived off his fortune. Ethan let out a low, amused chuckle, while I merely raised an eyebrow. Is that what she told you? I mused. Interesting. Because I built my company before I ever met Ethan. Ryan blinked, clearly caught off guard. Wait, so Carter Innovations is mine. I finished for him. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He turned and stared at Madison, who was now looking like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Madison? Ryan's voice was sharper now. You told me she was nothing, that she was a failure. Madison forced a laugh, though it came out shaky. Oh, come on, Ryan. Are you really going to believe her over me? She stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. I told you, she's always been manipulative. That's what she does. Ryan pulled his arm away, his face now filled with something colder, suspicion. And you told me you graduated from college, he said slowly. You told me you had a business degree. A horrible silence fell over the room. Madison's face drained of color. I tilted my head slightly, waiting to see how she would play this. Madison had always been a skilled liar. She could twist any situation in her favor. But tonight, she had no control over the narrative. I did graduate, she stammered. Ryan, don't be ridiculous. Then prove it, Ryan challenged, pulling out his phone. What's the name of your university? I'll call them right now. Madison's panic was instant. Her hands clenched at her sides, and her eyes darted toward our parents as if searching for help. But my mother and father were frozen in place, their expressions unreadable. For once, they weren't coming to her rescue. Ryan, stop, Madison snapped. This isn't the time for this. It's our wedding day. You're right, Ryan said coolly. It is. And I'd like to know if my wife has been lying to me before I say I do. I folded my arms, waiting. Madison was running out of ways to escape. Then, in a move so desperate it was almost laughable, she lunged at Ryan's phone, trying to snatch it from his hands. The next few seconds felt like slow motion. Ryan jerked back, but Madison was determined. She grabbed the phone, raised it high, and then
Slam.
she threw it to the ground, the screen shattering on impact. The room fell into dead silence. Everyone had seen it. Every single guest in that ballroom had just witnessed the bride lose all control. Madison's breath was ragged, her chest rising and falling quickly. For a moment, she looked wild, like a trapped animal. Ryan stared at her, his expression unreadable. But I could see the moment it clicked for him, the moment he truly understood. You lied, he murmured. Madison opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ryan exhaled sharply, then turned and walked away. Just like that. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He was done. The realization hit Madison like a punch. Ryan, wait, she cried, chasing after him. I watched them go, my stomach tightening. I knew what would come next. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Madison's entire web of lies unraveling, and there was no way to stop it now. I turned toward my parents, expecting to see rage. But instead, I saw something else.
Fear.
They knew. They knew that if Madison's lies were exposed, it would only be a matter of time before theirs were. 2. Ethan leaned closer to me, murmuring in my ear, "Do you want to leave?" I thought about it. I had already won. Madison had destroyed herself. My parents were watching their perfect family image crumble. And yet, a part of me wanted to stay just a little longer. Because this wasn't over.
Not yet.
The room still buzzed with whispers long after Madison and Ryan had disappeared from sight. I could feel eyes darting toward me, toward my parents, toward the shattered remains of Ryan's phone lying on the marble floor like a symbol of Madison's self-destruction. Yet, I remained still, my fingers lightly tracing the rim of my glass as I watched the chaos unravel. Madison had always been reckless, but this time, she had destroyed herself completely. She had spent years crafting a perfect image, a brilliant, well-educated woman married into wealth. But tonight, the entire foundation had cracked. And the best part? I hadn't lifted a single finger to make it happen. I felt Ethan lean in again, his voice calm but firm. "Charlotte, we can leave now." I considered it. I had already seen enough. Madison was spiraling, Ryan was no fool, and my parents, well, they had finally felt the consequences of their choices. But something kept me planted to the floor. Not vengeance. Not even satisfaction. Just closure. I turned my attention to my parents. They had been uncharacteristically silent, their faces rigid as they tried to process what had just happened. For the first time in my life, they didn't look like the untouchable, controlling figures I had known as a child. They looked small, afraid.
Mom.
"Dad," I finally said, my voice even. They flinched, like they hadn't expected me to acknowledge them. My father looked at me first, his eyes narrowing in an attempt to mask his unease with anger.
"What do you want?" he snapped.
I raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting question. I wasn't the one chasing someone down a hallway tonight. My mother, still shaken, finally spoke. "You should have never come here," she hissed under her breath. I let out a short laugh. I was invited. You're the ones acting like I broke into some secret family gathering. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You humiliated Madison. I didn't do anything, I corrected, sipping my drink. She did it all on her own. Silence. I tilted my head slightly. But you already knew that, didn't you? My father's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. Of course, they knew. They had been cleaning up Madison's messes her whole life. They had lied for her, covered for her, pushed all their expectations onto me because they knew Madison could never actually carry them. For years, I had been nothing more than a financial backup plan. They had kept me around just long enough to try and force me into paying for Madison's lifestyle, and when I refused, they had thrown me away like I never mattered. But I had survived, and I had done it without them. The longer they stayed quiet, the more their shame became obvious. They weren't arguing because there was nothing to argue against. They knew I was right, and for the first time, I could see the real fear in their eyes. Not just because of Madison. Not just because Ryan had probably figured out the truth and was questioning everything, but because they knew what was coming next. My father was the first to break, straightening his tie and forcing a scoff. "Well, whatever happens, we're still family," he muttered.
Family.
That word meant nothing coming from them. "Are we?" I asked, my voice light, but my meaning clear. Because the last time I checked, family doesn't disown their child for refusing to hand over their paychecks. My mother's jaw clenched. "We gave you a home. We raised you. And you threw me out." I cut her off sharply. "And now, suddenly, I'm your daughter again?" I saw panic flash in my mother's eyes, a sign that I had hit the nerve she had desperately tried to protect. They needed something from me. I could see it now. Then I understood. It wasn't just about Madison's humiliation tonight. It was about their own downfall. The realization struck me so hard, I almost laughed out loud. Of course, their business was crumbling. They had invested so much into Madison, believing she would be their golden ticket, and now that everything was falling apart, they needed a new solution. And that's why they hated seeing me succeed. I was supposed to be beneath them. I was supposed to be struggling. Instead, I had thrived, and they had lost everything. The irony was almost too much to handle. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice just enough, so only my parents could hear. "Is that why you're here? You think I'll help you?" My father tensed. "That's ridiculous." My mother looked away. I smirked. So it's true. The anger in my father's expression slipped, replaced by something closer to resentful desperation. He hated admitting it, but he knew I had figured him out. My mother finally spoke, her voice softer this time. "Charlotte, we're still your parents." Something inside me snapped. For years, I had longed to hear those words. For years, I had wanted to matter to them. But not anymore. I set my glass down and met my mother's gaze head-on. "No, you're not." My mother's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to reject her so completely. "You threw me away when I was no longer useful to you." I continued, my voice calm but sharp. "Now that Madison has ruined her life and your business is failing, you suddenly remember that I exist?" My father's fists clenched, but I kept going. "You only care because I'm successful now. If I was still struggling, you wouldn't even look at me," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm not your daughter. I stopped being that the moment you turned your backs on me." My mother inhaled sharply. "Charlotte, you can't just." "Yes, I can." I cut her off. She opened her mouth to argue, but I was already done. I turned to Ethan, who had been watching quietly, letting me have my moment. He met my gaze and nodded. "Ready to go?" I nodded.
Yeah.
"I think I've seen enough." I stood up, not sparing my parents another glance. They didn't call after me, didn't try to stop me, and that told me everything I needed to know. I had won. I had walked into this room with nothing to prove, but I was leaving knowing that I had done what I once thought was impossible. I had broken free from them completely. As Ethan and I walked toward the exit, I exhaled slowly, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me.
I wasn't running away this time.
I was simply walking forward, away from my past and toward my future. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt truly free. As Ethan and I stepped out of the ballroom into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. The sky was a deep navy, the distant waves crashing against the shore. The evening had felt like a storm brewing inside me. But now, walking away, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Ethan's fingers laced with mine, grounding me in the present. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice filled with understanding. I exhaled, my shoulders relaxing for the first time that night. "Yeah, I really am." For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding on to any anger. I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, their manipulation, or their cruelty. I had let go. We walked toward the valet, but before we could reach the car, I heard hurried footsteps behind us. A voice called out, "Charlotte, wait." I turned, already knowing who it was.
Ryan.
He looked different, his usual confidence replaced by something uncertain. His suit was slightly undone, as if he had been running his hands through his hair. His expression wasn't angry or defensive. It was the look of a man who had just seen his life fall apart in real time. Ethan stayed by my side, silent but watchful. Ryan stopped a few feet away, hesitating. He shook his head, exhaling. I had no idea. I said nothing. He let out a bitter laugh, rubbing his jaw. Madison lied about everything. His voice was thick with disbelief, like he was still processing it all. I believed her. I trusted her. And he cut himself off, scoffing. I feel like an idiot. I tilted my head slightly. She's always been good at pretending. He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line.
Yeah.
And I fell for all of it. His eyes met mine. She told me you were a failure. She told me you had nothing. His voice grew quieter. But you're the most successful person I've met in my entire life. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had already done that for me. Ryan swallowed, his throat bobbing. I called the university she claimed to have graduated from. He let out a harsh chuckle. They've never even heard of her. I wasn't surprised. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. She tried to lie again. Tried to say you set her up. That this was all some elaborate plan to ruin her. That actually made me laugh. Madison was always good at rewriting reality. Yeah, he muttered, shaking his head. But I'm done believing her. He exhaled sharply, his gaze hardening. I'm filing for an annulment. I blinked. Annulment? He nodded. The marriage was built on lies. Everything about it was a lie. I don't want to be tied to her, not even legally. I studied him for a moment. He wasn't just saying it out of anger. He meant it. Madison had lost everything. Her husband, her reputation, and the life she tried to build on deception. Ryan let out a slow breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry.
His voice softened.
For believing her lies about you. For not seeing what was right in front of me. I could hear the sincerity in his words, the quiet regret. Unlike my parents, Ryan wasn't trying to manipulate me. He wasn't asking for anything. After a pause, I gave him a small nod. I appreciate that. His shoulders relaxed slightly, like he had needed to hear it. Ryan nodded one last time before stepping back. Take care, Charlotte. You too. And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Ethan squeezed my hand gently. Ready to go home?
I smiled, nodding. Yeah.
Let's go. The drive home was peaceful, the weight on my chest finally gone. My parents had lost everything. Madison had destroyed her own future. Ryan had broken free from the illusion he had been trapped in. And me? I was going home to a life I had built from nothing. A life filled with love, stability, and happiness. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw the warm glow of the lights inside. The moment I stepped through the front door, I heard a sleepy little voice call out, "Mommy?" I turned, my heart melting as Emma stood in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," I murmured, kneeling down to pull her into my arms. She snuggled into my shoulder, letting out a tiny yawn. Ethan chuckled. "She insisted on waiting up for you." I kissed the top of her head. "Did she?" Emma pulled back slightly, blinking up at me. "Did you get the cake?" I laughed softly, nodding. "Of course." Her sleepy face lit up, and I felt warmth spread through my chest. This was my family. This was my home. Tonight had been the final chapter of a story I had been waiting to close for years. And now it was over. I had nothing left to prove. No one left to fight. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. I was only looking forward. And it felt damn good.